The October wind cut through the valley like a blade, cold enough to make the aspens shiver and drop their golden leaves across the manicured lawn of the Hartfield estate. Connor Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, his shoulders squared against the wind, his eyes fixed on the polished mahogany casket suspended above the open grave. His wife lay inside that box, her hands folded across her chest, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months before the end. Grace, the name settled in his chest like a stone. Beside him, his 13-year-old twin stood silent. Sophie gripped his left hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Liam pressed against his right side, jaw clenched, trying to look braver than any boy his age should have to. Between them sat Bear, a German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat the color of autumn wheat. The dog held perfect military posture, ears forward, watching everything, sensing the danger Connor could feel gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. At the front of the assembly, William Hartfield stood behind the podium, silver-haired and imperious in a black wool coat that probably cost more than Connor made in 6 months. Grace's father, the man who had disowned his daughter 15 years ago for choosing love over legacy. Now he stood before 200 mourners, delivering a eulogy that twisted truth into something unrecognizable. "My daughter Grace was a woman of extraordinary potential," William said, his voice carrying across the cemetery with practiced authority. "She deserved a life of comfort, of security, of opportunity. She deserved the very best this world could offer." Connor felt his jaw tighten. The implication hung in the cold air like smoke. She deserved better than what she got. Better than a broken soldier living on disability. Better than a ranch hand's daughter who married for love instead of money. Grace had chosen differently. She had chosen a man who listened instead of commanded. She had chosen a small life built on honesty instead of a grand one constructed from manipulation. And that choice, Connor knew, was something William Hartfield had never forgiven. "As a father," William continued, his voice catching just enough to sound genuine, "I only wanted what was best for her. I wanted to protect her from hardship, from struggle, from the difficulties that come with choosing a path of sacrifice." Sophie's grip tightened. Connor felt her trembling, whether from cold or grief or rage, he couldn't tell. He placed his other hand over hers, a silent promise. "I'm here. We're together. We'll survive this." The service ended with a prayer Connor didn't hear. His mind had drifted to the hospital room 4 months ago, to Grace's final words whispered through oxygen tubes and failing strength. "Protect them," she had said. Her eyes, once so full of life, had been dim with exhaustion. "Promise me you will protect them from him." He had promised. He had held her hand until the rhythm of the machines went flat and the nurses came with their quiet efficiency to turn off the monitors and draw the curtains. He had promised, and now that promise was all he had left. The mourners began to disperse, moving in clusters toward the mansion, where a reception waited with catered food and polite conversation. Connor started to guide the twins toward his truck, parked at the far edge of the lot among the overflow vehicles. They had not been invited to the reception. The message had been clear in the formal funeral announcement: family only. Grace had been family. Sophie and Liam were family. Connor was something else, something temporary, something that could be removed. "Connor." The voice stopped him mid-stride. He turned to find William Hartfield approaching, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who looked more like security than mourners. Bear immediately shifted position, placing himself between the twins and the approaching threat. A low sound rumbled in the dog's chest, barely audible but unmistakable. "Easy, boy," Connor murmured. His hand found the thick fur at Bear's neck, a grounding touch for both of them. William stopped 6 feet away, his expression carved from ice. "We need to discuss arrangements," he said. No preamble, no acknowledgement of the children standing right there, faces still wet with tears. "What arrangements?" Connor asked quietly. William's eyes flicked to Sophie and Liam, then back to Connor with cold calculation. "The children cannot continue living in your current situation. It's unstable, unsuitable for their development." Connor felt his heartbeat slow, the way it used to before missions when clarity became survival. "We're doing fine. You're living in a rented house on disability income," William said, voice sharp as broken glass. "You work part-time at a hardware store. You have documented PTSD episodes. This is not an environment for my grandchildren." "They're my children," Connor said, keeping his voice level. "Grace and I raised them together." "And Grace is gone." William stepped closer, lowering his voice so the remaining mourners couldn't hear. I've already consulted with attorneys. Emergency custody petitions can be filed on grounds of financial instability and mental health concerns. I can provide them with education, opportunity, everything Grace would have wanted for them. Sophie made a small sound, quickly stifled. Liam's hand found his sister's, their fingers interlocking with desperate strength. Connor met William's gaze without flinching. Grace would have wanted them with their father. Then perhaps Grace made poor decisions, William replied. A muscle twitched near his temple, the only crack in his controlled facade. You have 72 hours to collect your belongings from the guest house. After that, I'm changing the locks. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery grass. Bear's growl deepened. One of the security men reached for something at his belt, and Connor recognized the motion. Taser. They had come prepared for confrontation. Come on, kids, Connor said softly. We're leaving. He turned without waiting for William's response, guiding Sophie and Liam toward the truck. Bear moved with them, keeping himself positioned as a barrier between his family and the men behind them. Connor didn't look back. Looking back would mean showing weakness, and weakness was something William Hartfield knew how to exploit. They drove in silence. The truck was 10 years old, the heater temperamental, the shocks worn down so every bump in the road translated through the frame. Connor kept both hands on the wheel, eyes on the highway that wound through the mountains, mind racing through options that all led to dead ends. His savings account held maybe $40,000. Grace's medical bills had consumed everything else. The rental house lease was month to month. His disability check covered basics, nothing more. He had survived firefights in Afghanistan. He had held dying soldiers in his arms and felt their last breaths rattle against his chest. He had learned to function through pain that should have broken him. But this, fighting a billionaire for his own children, this was a war he didn't know how to win. Dad, Sophie whispered from the back seat. Where are we going? Connor glanced in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, hands still clutching the funeral program with Grace's photo on the front. Beside her, Liam stared out the window, jaw set in that way that reminded Connor so much of Grace it hurt. Somewhere safe, Connor said, somewhere quiet. He didn't mention that he had no idea where that somewhere might be. The rental house was paid through the end of the month, but William's threat hung over it like a guillotine. 72 hours. Then what? A custody battle he couldn't afford? Lawyers he couldn't hire? A system that looked at a disabled veteran and saw liability instead of love? Bear shifted in the passenger seat, pressing his nose against the window. The dog had been trained for combat, for tracking, for protection. Connor had adopted him 3 years ago when Bear retired from military service. Both of them damaged in ways that didn't show on medical charts. They understood each other. When Connor's hands shook with tremors he couldn't control, Bear would lean against him with steady weight. When nightmares pulled Connor back to Kandahar, Bear would wake him with a cold nose and patient eyes. Now the dog watched the road with the same intensity he'd shown in the cemetery. Alert, waiting, ready for whatever came next. The highway climbed higher into the mountains, autumn colors blazing on both sides. This was Montana in October, when the world looked like it was on fire with beauty before winter came to bury everything in snow. Grace had loved this time of year. She used to take the twins hiking, pointing out elk in the meadows, and teaching them the names of wildflowers Connor could never remember. The memory twisted in his chest. 2 hours passed before Connor turned off the main highway onto a gravel road that hadn't been maintained in years. Potholes jarred the truck. Branches scraped the sides. Sophie sat up straighter, confusion replacing grief on her face. Where are we? She asked. Connor didn't answer immediately. The road curved through dense pine forest, then emerged into a clearing where a house stood against the backdrop of distant mountains. Stood was generous. The structure sagged like something exhausted, its roof missing shingles, its porch steps broken, its windows dark and vacant. Outbuildings clustered nearby in similar states of decay. A barn, an equipment shed, fences that had collapsed into geometric patterns of failure. This was the Hayes homestead, Grace's grandmother's ranch. 800 acres of land that had been abandoned for 15 years, slowly returning to wilderness while legal disputes and family feuds kept anyone from claiming it. Mom's grandma's place, Liam said quietly. She told us about it once, said it used to be beautiful. It was, Connor said. According to Grace, it had been a working ranch once with horses and cattle and fields of hay that turned gold under summer sun. Her grandmother Helen had raised Grace's mother here, and Grace herself had spent childhood summers riding through these mountains, sleeping under stars, learning that wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts. Then Helen had died, and William Hartfield had tried to sell the property for development. But the will had been complicated, written in a way that made quick sales impossible. So the ranch sat empty, rotting slowly, waiting for someone who cared enough to save it. Connor parked near the porch and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy, broken only by wind moving through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. "We're staying here?" Sophie's voice was small. "For now," Connor said, "just until we figure things out." He climbed out, boots crunching on gravel mixed with pine needles. Bear leaped down beside him and immediately began a perimeter check, nose low, moving in widening circles around the property. Training never left a military dog. Even in retirement, Bear treated every new location like potential hostile territory. The porch groaned under Connor's weight. The front door wasn't locked because the lock had rusted through years ago. It swung open with a sound like a wounded animal, revealing darkness that smelled of mold and dust and time. Connor pulled out his phone, activated the flashlight, and stepped inside. The interior looked like a museum of abandonment. Furniture sat under layers of dust and mouse droppings. Cobwebs hung from ceiling beams thick as rope. The floor creaked ominously with each step, some boards bowing under his weight in ways that suggested rot underneath. No power, no running water, no heat except whatever the old wood stove might provide if he could get it working. "This is where Mom grew up?" Liam had followed him inside, his voice echoing in the empty rooms. "Not grew up," Connor corrected. "Visited. Your mom loved this place. Her grandmother taught her about plants and animals, about being self-sufficient. She always said this ranch was freedom." "Looks like a prison," Sophie whispered from the doorway. She hadn't crossed the threshold, as if entering would make their situation real in a way she wasn't ready to accept. Connor didn't argue. He walked through the house, checking each room, cataloging damage. Broken windows, water stains on ceilings, evidence of animals nesting in corners. The kitchen pump handle moved but produced nothing. The bathroom was unusable without plumbing. Upstairs, the bedrooms looked structurally questionable, but the bones were solid. The foundation was stone, built to last. The frame was old-growth timber that wouldn't rot easily. With work, with time, with resources he didn't have, this could be a home again. "We'll camp downstairs tonight," Connor said, coming back to find both twins still standing uncertainly in the doorway. "We've got sleeping bags in the truck. Bear will keep watch." "Dad," Liam started, then stopped. His voice cracked. "Why didn't Mom tell us about this place?" Connor knelt in front of his son, meeting eyes that were so much like Grace's it made his chest ache. "Because she was ashamed," he said honestly. "She wanted to fix it up first, make it beautiful again before she showed you. She had plans to restore it, to bring you here for summers. She just ran out of time." The truth settled over them like snow. Time was the currency Grace hadn't been able to afford. The cancer had come fast, disguised as exhaustion and shortness of breath, until the diagnosis came too late for anything but managing pain and counting days. They unloaded the truck as afternoon faded toward evening. Sleeping bags, a camp stove, cooler with food, flashlights and batteries. The twins moved like automatons, faces blank with shock or grief, or the simple overwhelm of too much change too fast. Connor let them work in silence, understanding that sometimes activity was the only thing standing between a person and complete collapse. Bear ranged across the property, investigating every building, every shadow. Connor watched the dog's body language, reading signals trained into both of them by service. Bear moved with purpose but not alarm. No immediate threats, no intruders, just old buildings and older memories. As darkness fell, Connor got the wood stove working, feeding it kindling and small logs until warmth began to push back the cold. They ate granola bars and cold sandwiches, sitting on sleeping bags spread across the floor. Nobody spoke. Words felt too heavy, too likely to break the fragile control they were all maintaining. Then Sophie found the diary. She had been exploring near the old stone fireplace, running her hands along the mantel when her fingers caught on something, a loose brick. She wiggled it free and reached into the gap behind it, pulling out a small book bound in faded leather. "Dad, look." Connor took the diary, opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed but intact, filled with handwriting he recognized instantly. Grace's handwriting, but younger, less controlled. The first entry was dated 15 years ago. September 3rd, I'm 16 and Dad won't let me come to the ranch anymore. He says Grandma Helen is filling my head with dangerous ideas about simple living and rejecting ambition. But I don't think wanting to be happy instead of rich is dangerous. I think it's the only sane thing in this world. Connor read aloud, voice steady despite the emotion building in his throat. Sophie and Liam moved closer, drawn by their mother's words reaching across time. The entries continued, Grace writing about her love for the ranch, her frustration with William's control, her dreams of a different life. Then later, entries about meeting a soldier. Connor Hayes. He's kind, he listens. He doesn't try to fix me or change me. He just sees me. Sophie was crying again, quiet tears tracking down her cheeks. Liam stared at the fire, jaw muscles working. Connor kept reading until he reached the final entry. October 1st, I'm pregnant. Twins. Connor proposed yesterday. Dad says if I marry him, I'm cut off from the family. I don't care. I choose love. I choose freedom. I choose the ranch in my heart, even if I can't live there yet. He closed the diary gently, setting it on the mantel where Grace had hidden it so many years ago. Your mother knew exactly what she wanted, Connor said, and she fought for it every day of her life. Did she want us here, Sophie asked, in this broken place? She wanted you to understand, Connor said, that home isn't about buildings or money. It's about the people you're with and the values you hold. This ranch was freedom to her because it was honest. No pretending, no performing for approval, just real life. Bear, who had been lying near the stove, suddenly stood. His ears swiveled forward, focused on something outside. A low growl built in his chest. Connor was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Darkness had fully settled now, the moon not yet risen. He saw nothing but shadows and the vague shapes of trees. Bear moved to the door, pawing at it, whining with urgency. Stay here, Connor told the twins. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The night air bit cold. Stars blazed overhead in patterns that city lights never allowed. Connor scanned the clearing, the tree line, the dark shapes of outbuildings. Nothing moved. No sounds except wind and the distant hoot of an owl. Then Bear took off running, straight toward the barn. Connor followed, flashlight beam bouncing with each step. The dog disappeared around the corner of the structure, barking now, sharp and insistent. Connor rounded the barn and stopped. Bear stood in front of the old stone foundation, digging frantically at the base, dirt flying. Not random digging, focused, purposeful, the same behavior he'd shown overseas when detecting buried explosives or hidden weapons caches. What is it, boy? Connor knelt beside the dog, aiming his light at the spot where Bear was excavating. His fingers brushed something hard. Metal. He dug faster, clearing dirt and old leaves until he could grip the object and pull. It resisted, then came free with a sucking sound. A metal box. Military grade. Fireproof. Lockbox model. The kind used to protect documents in field conditions. Connor recognized it because he'd used identical boxes in Afghanistan. The box was heavy, sealed tight. Connor carried it back to the house, Bear trotting beside him with satisfaction radiating from every step. Inside, the twins watched as Connor set the box on the floor near the fireplace. The metal was cold, covered in dirt, but intact. A combination lock held it closed, 4 digits. Do you know the combination? Liam asked. Connor examined the lock more carefully, tilting it toward the firelight. Something had been scratched into the metal on the bottom, crude letters carved with a knife or screwdriver. SOCA 1113. He stared at the letters, mind racing. Then understanding hit. Sophie, Connor, Liam, November 13th, the twins' birthday. His hands shook slightly as he spun the dial. 5, 0, 1, 1. The lock clicked open. Connor lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a waterproof bag, were 3 items. A USB drive in a protective case, legal documents folded and sealed in plastic, and a letter handwritten on the heavy stationery Grace had always preferred, sealed in an envelope with Connor's name written across the front in her distinctive script. For a long moment, Connor just stared at the envelope. Seeing Grace's handwriting again felt like touching an electrical current. Present tense, immediate, as if she were still here, still trying to communicate, still fighting to protect them. Sophie moved beside him. That's Mom's writing. Connor nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Open it, Liam whispered. Connor broke the seal carefully, unfolded the pages inside. 3 sheets, covered front and back with Grace's precise handwriting. He began to read silently at first, but Sophie's hand on his arm stopped him. Out loud, she said, "Please." Connor cleared his throat and began again, reading the words Grace had written, knowing she wouldn't be there to speak them herself. "My dearest Connor, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Dad has already started his attack. I'm so sorry." The letter detailed everything. The inheritance from grandmother Helen that Grace had never mentioned. The 800 acres and mineral rights worth $150 million. The years of William's attempts to steal it through forged documents and legal manipulation. The threats that had started 6 months ago when Grace finally understood the full scope of her father's fraud. "Last month, Dad threatened me directly. He said if I didn't sign the ranch over to him, he would prove you were dangerous and take Sophie and Liam. I refused. 3 days later, my heart episode started." Connor's voice caught. He forced himself to continue. "I don't know if the stress triggered my condition or if there was something else. But I know that fear is killing me as surely as any disease. Fear of losing our children. Fear of what Dad will do. Fear that I've waited too long to tell you the truth. The USB drive has proof of everything. Dad's forged documents, his illegal sale of mineral rights to Apex Oil Corporation. He's already signed contracts for $200 million. The deal closes in 60 days. If he can't deliver the land, he faces a $50 million penalty plus federal fraud charges. He will come for you, Connor. He will come for our babies. He'll use the courts, use money, use every weapon he has. And I won't be there to fight beside you." Connor paused, blinking against the burn in his eyes. Sophie had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming. Liam sat rigid, fists clenched. "But you're not defenseless," Grace had written. "The real will is with Father Ben Crowley at St. Michael's Church. Grandmother Helen left the land in trust for community benefit. It can't be sold for private development. Dad's entire deal is built on fraud. Trust Bear. He knows the land better than any of us. He'll find what you need when you need it. And Connor, you are not broken. You saved lives in war. Now save our children. I love you. Always, Grace." The silence that followed felt sacred and terrible. Connor carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box with shaking hands. His mind raced through implications, through the depth of Grace's planning, through the courage it must have taken to write these words knowing she was dying. "She knew," Sophie whispered. "She knew Grandpa William would try to take us." Connor nodded. "She knew, and she tried to protect us. Even from her grave, she's still fighting." "What do we do?" Liam asked. Before Connor could answer, Bear barked once, sharp and urgent. The dog moved to the window, tail stiff, body alert. Connor grabbed the flashlight and went to look. At first he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye. Headlights far down the dirt road. A vehicle approaching slowly, cautiously. Too soon for another visitor. Too deliberate for someone who was lost. Connor killed their lights and moved the twins away from the windows. "Get in the back room. Take Bear. Don't come out until I say." "Dad, what is it?" Fear edged Sophie's voice. Connor handed Liam the metal box. "Hide this. If something happens to me, get to St. Michael's Church. Ask for Father Ben Crowley. He'll help you." "Nothing's going to happen," Liam said, but his voice shook. "Go, now!" They obeyed, Bear reluctantly following them into the rear bedroom. Connor watched from darkness as the vehicle reached the clearing and stopped. Headlights shut off. A door opened and closed. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Then a voice called out, official and impersonal. "Connor Hayes, Sheriff's Department. I have paperwork for you." Connor stepped onto the porch slowly, hands visible, moving like he'd learned in countries where the wrong gesture got you shot. The deputy stood beside his cruiser, a manila envelope in one hand. "Kinda late for a delivery," Connor said. "Court order," the deputy replied. "Required immediate service." He approached, handed Connor the envelope, then retreated quickly. Connor didn't open it until the cruiser was gone, taillights disappearing down the road. Inside were legal documents. Emergency custody petition, filed by William Hartfield. Hearing scheduled in 5 days. Allegations of financial instability, unsuitable living conditions, untreated mental health issues posing danger to minors. The words blurred together. Connor leaned against the porch railing, the papers shaking in his grip. 5 days. William wasn't waiting 72 hours. He was moving now, immediately, before Connor could prepare any defense. A sound made him turn. Bear had come back outside, moving past him to the edge of the clearing. The dog stood rigid, staring at the tree line. Connor followed his gaze and saw them. fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near the barn. Not from the deputy's cruiser. Different tread pattern. Someone else had been here earlier. Choam. Watching, waiting. Then he saw the cigarette butts. 3 of them, carefully arranged in a line near where the tracks ended. A message. We were here. We're watching. We know. Bear growled, a sound that came from deep in his chest, and Connor understood. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't PTSD, making him see threats that didn't exist. Someone had been surveilling them. Someone knew they'd come here. Someone was reporting back to William Hartfield. The war, Connor realized, had already begun. Grace had tried to arm him with information, with legal protection, with warning. But information only mattered if you survived long enough to use it. He called Bear inside and locked the door. The lock was old and probably useless, but the gesture mattered. Then he went to check on the twins. They sat on sleeping bags in the back room, the metal box between them. Sophie had her sketchbook out, drawing by flashlight. Liam held the legal documents Connor had left them earlier, reading with fierce concentration. Is someone out there? Sophie asked without looking up from her drawing. Not anymore, Connor said. But we need to be careful. Your grandfather is moving faster than I expected. What's going to happen at the hearing? Liam's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the papers too tightly. Connor sat down, cross-legged, feeling his knees protest. I don't know yet, but we're not going to just roll over. He looked at his children, really looked at them. Sophie, who drew constantly because art was the only language that made sense of grief. Liam, who read everything, absorbing information like armor against uncertainty. Both of them trying so hard to be strong, to not add to his burden. Your mom left us tools to fight with, Connor said. Legal documents, proof of your grandfather's fraud, the real will that blocks his sale. We're not powerless, but he has money, Sophie said quietly, and we have a broken house and a dad with PTSD. That's what the judge will see. The truth of it hit like a punch. She was right. William would present a gleaming case of stability and opportunity. Connor would stand there in his only suit, the one he'd worn to Grace's funeral, and try to explain that love mattered more than money. In the silence that followed, Bear moved to sit beside Connor, pressing his weight against Connor's leg. The contact was grounding, steady, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. We'll figure it out, Connor said, with more confidence than he felt. One step at a time. Tomorrow we find Father Ben and get the real will. Then we find a lawyer who'll take our case. With what money? Liam asked. Connor didn't have an answer. His savings would maybe cover a retainer for a family law attorney. Maybe. William would have a team of lawyers, each one billing more per hour than Connor made in a week. But Grace had believed he could do this. She had planned for this moment, armed him with evidence, pointed him toward allies. He had to trust that her faith wasn't misplaced. Get some sleep, Connor said. Both of you. Tomorrow's a long day. They settled into their sleeping bags reluctantly. Connor stayed awake, sitting with his back against the wall, Bear beside him. The dog didn't sleep either. They kept watch together, 2 old soldiers in a new war, protecting the things that mattered most. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shingles and whistling through gaps in the walls. The cold deepened. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles. Connor's mind wouldn't quiet. He kept replaying Grace's letter, the warning about William's desperation, the timeline of the oil deal. 60 days. If Connor could stall the custody hearing, delay the land transfer, expose the fraud before the deal closed, William's entire empire would collapse. But stalling required lawyers. Delays required legal maneuvering. Exposure required evidence that would hold up in court. All of it required resources Connor didn't have. His hand found Bear's fur, fingers working through the thick coat. The dog leaned into the touch, a rumble of contentment mixing with vigilance. We've been in worse spots, Connor whispered. Remember Kandahar? That convoy ambush? We got out of that. Bear's ear twitched. Whether the dog actually remembered or just responded to Connor's tone didn't matter. The connection was real, the trust was absolute. Hours passed. The moon rose, silver light streaming through the broken windows. Connor's eyes grew heavy despite his determination to stay alert. He blinked, fighting sleep, then blinked again and realized dawn light was filtering through the room. He dozed off. The realization brought instant alertness and a spike of fear. How long had he been out? Bear stood beside the window, staring out with intense focus. Not alarmed, just watching. Connor moved to join him and saw fresh snow dusting the ground. First snow of the season, thin and delicate, already melting where sunlight touched. And there at the edge of the clearing, new footprints, human, leading from the trees to the barn and back again. Someone had been here during the night, walking the property while Connor slept, taking photos or making notes or simply sending a message. We're not safe here, Connor realized. William knew where they were. He had people watching, documenting, building his case that Connor couldn't provide basic security for his children. The twins woke to find Connor packing their gear. We're leaving, he said, just for today. We need to get to town, find Father Ben, figure out our next move. Where will we go after that? Sophie asked. Connor helped her roll up her sleeping bag, struck by how small she looked in the morning light, thin and pale and carrying grief that aged her beyond 13 years. I don't know yet, he admitted, but your mom gave us a fighting chance. We're going to take it. They loaded the truck as the sun climbed higher, burning off the thin snow. Bear made one final circuit of the property, marking territory, checking for threats. Then he jumped into the passenger seat and sat at attention, ready for whatever came next. Connor took one last look at the ranch house. Broken and abandoned, yes, but also honest, real. A place where Grace had dreamed of freedom and simple joy, a place worth fighting for. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. The road back to town was long and winding, dropping out of the mountains towards civilization and courtrooms, and a battle that would determine everything. In the rearview mirror, he watched the ranch disappear behind trees and distance. But he could still feel it, pulling at something deep in his chest, the homestead, the legacy, the dream Grace had protected even as she died. He wouldn't let William Hartfield destroy it. Not the land, not the dream, and especially not the children who carried Grace's hopes into whatever future they could build from the wreckage of loss. Bear pressed his nose against the window, breath fogging the glass. Ahead, the road curved toward town. Behind, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. And somewhere between the two, Connor Hayes prepared to fight the most important battle of his life. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley. Connor drove toward uncertainty with his children beside him and a ghost's instructions in his pocket. Grace had believed he was strong enough for this. Now he had to prove her right, one impossible day at a time. The war for the homestead had begun, and Connor Hayes, broken but not beaten, was done running from fights he didn't choose. This one he would see through to the end, whatever it cost, however long it took. For Grace, for Sophie, for Liam, for the legacy that mattered more than money or power or pride. He pressed the accelerator and drove toward whatever dawn would bring. Bear beside him, children behind him, and a dead woman's love lighting the path ahead. The drive into Missoula took 3 hours through mountain passes where early snow had already begun to accumulate on the higher elevations. Connor kept the truck steady on roads that twisted like ribbon, through pine forests still holding their autumn color at lower altitudes. In the passenger seat, Bear maintained vigilant watch, his amber eyes tracking every vehicle that passed, every shadow that moved. The twins sat silent in back, exhausted from a night of broken sleep and the weight of knowledge that felt too heavy for children their age. The custody papers lay on the dashboard where morning sun could illuminate every damning word. Allegations of instability, claims of inadequate housing, psychiatric evaluations. Connor had never undergone cited as evidence of danger. William Hartfield's lawyers had been thorough, building a case designed to strip away parental rights before Connor even understood he was under attack. 5 days until the hearing. 5 days to find a lawyer, mount a defense, and somehow convince a judge that love mattered more than the gleaming presentation of wealth and institutional power that William would bring to bear. The Veterans Legal Aid Office occupied a converted storefront on the edge of downtown, sandwiched between a pawn shop and a tattoo parlor. The sign in the window had faded from years of Montana sun, the paint peeling at the corners. Connor parked and sat for a moment, gathering himself. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, a tremor that had started in Afghanistan and never quite left. Bear noticed immediately, pressing his head against Connor's arm with steady weight. "I'm okay, boy," Connor murmured. "Just need a minute." Through the window of the legal aid office, he could see a woman working at a desk, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. Something about her posture suggested competence, the kind of focused attention that came from caring about the work rather than just collecting a paycheck. Connor climbed out and opened the back door for the twins. You two can wait here or come in. Your choice. We're coming, Liam said immediately. Sophie nodded agreement, her sketchbook clutched against her chest like a shield. The office interior smelled of old coffee and legal paper. File boxes lined the walls, stacked 3 high in some places. A single desk dominated the small space, covered in organized chaos. The woman looked up as they entered, and Connor saw intelligence in her eyes, along with the particular weariness that came from fighting losing battles for people who couldn't afford better representation. Help you? Her voice carried traces of East Coast accent, softened by years out west. Connor stepped forward, Bear moving with him. I need a lawyer, custody case, emergency hearing in 5 days. The woman set down her pen and gave him her full attention. Her gaze moved over him quickly, cataloging details with practiced efficiency. The worn jacket, the military bearing he couldn't quite hide, the service dog at his side, the children behind him with grief still fresh in their faces. Sit, she said, gesturing to chairs that had seen better decades. I'm Kelly Brennan. Tell me everything. Connor sat, feeling the chair creak under his weight. Sophie and Liam settled on either side of him, close enough that their shoulders pressed against his. Bear positioned himself at Connor's feet, a warm weight against his boots. My wife died 4 months ago. Connor's voice came out steady despite the tightness in his chest. Her father is William Hartfield. Maybe you've heard of him. Kelly's expression shifted slightly. The billionaire? The mining and real estate developer? That's him. Connor pulled the custody papers from his jacket and slid them across the desk. He's filed for emergency custody of my kids. Claims I'm unfit, unstable, can't provide adequate care. Kelly scanned the documents, her eyes moving quickly across the legal language. As she read, her jaw tightened. When she finished, she removed her glasses and met Connor's gaze directly. I've heard of William Hartfield. She set the papers down carefully as if they might detonate. He's considered untouchable in this state, owns half the judges, employs 1/4 of the workforce. Nobody crosses him and wins. I'm not looking to win, Connor said quietly. I'm looking to keep my children. Kelly leaned back in her chair, studying him. Why you? What does Hartfield gain from taking 2 grieving kids away from their father? It's not about the kids. Connor reached into his jacket again and pulled out Grace's letter, still in its protective plastic. It's about 800 acres of land and mineral rights worth $150 million. He explained while Kelly listened without interrupting. The inheritance from Grace's grandmother, the will that prevented private development, William's fraudulent sale to Apex Oil Corporation, the threats that had started months before Grace's death, the stress that might have triggered the heart failure that killed her. When Connor finished, Kelly sat in silence for a long moment. Then she pulled Grace's letter closer and read it carefully, her expression growing darker with each paragraph. This is incredible, she said finally. If even half of this is provable, William Hartfield isn't just facing a custody loss. He's facing federal fraud charges. I don't want revenge, Connor said. I want my kids safe. I want to honor what Grace tried to protect. Kelly looked at Sophie and Liam, then back to Connor. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? Take on a billionaire with unlimited resources and a network of influence that reaches into every courtroom in Montana? With 5 days to prepare, Connor met her eyes steadily. My wife died trying to stop him. I won't dishonor that by giving up before the fight even starts. Something shifted in Kelly's expression. She glanced at a photo on her desk that Connor hadn't noticed before. A Marine in dress blues, young and proud, standing beside a younger version of Kelly. My husband, she said quietly. James died 3 years ago. Failed him. PTSD and prescription drugs in a system that didn't care until it was too late. I'm sorry, Connor said. Kelly straightened, decision crystallizing in her posture. I take cases like this because someone should have fought for James when it mattered. She pulled a legal pad toward her and uncapped a pen. I'll represent you pro bono, but you need to understand something. William will come at us with everything. Character assassination, psychiatric evaluations, financial scrutiny. He'll dig into every mistake you've ever made and present it as proof you're dangerous. I've got PTSD, Connor acknowledged. I have nightmares. Sometimes my hands shake. I live on disability and part-time work. All of that is true. But I love my kids and I'm a good father. Then we make that truth louder than his lies, Kelly said. She turned to Sophie and Liam. I'm going to need you two to be brave. Can you do that? We've been brave for 4 months, Sophie said. voice soft but steady. Since Mom got sick. Kelly nodded, respect in her eyes. Then let's get to work. The next hours passed in a blur of questions and documentation. Kelly took detailed notes about Grace's illness, the timeline of William's threats, the contents of the metal box Bear had discovered. She made copies of everything, organized files with military precision, and began constructing the framework of their defense. We need the original will, she said. The one your wife mentioned. Where is it? Father Ben Crowley has it. Connor checked his watch. St. Michael's Church. I was planning to go there next. Go now. Kelly was already on her phone, pulling up court filing systems. I'll start the paperwork for an injunction protecting the land title. If we can prove William's fraud before the custody hearing, it changes everything. Connor stood, relief and exhaustion mixing in equal measure. Thank you. Kelly looked up from her screen. Don't thank me yet. We're about to walk into a firestorm. But your wife was right about one thing. You're not defenseless. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the western peaks. Connor loaded the twins back into the truck and headed for St. Michael's, a stone church on the north side of town that had stood for over a century. Father Ben Crowley had been Grace's godfather, one of the few people William hadn't been able to intimidate or buy off. The church parking lot was nearly empty. Connor led the way up worn stone steps, Bear at his side, the twins following close. Inside, the sanctuary was dim and cool, smelling of incense and old wood. Stained glass windows cast colored light across empty pews. A door at the front opened, and an elderly priest emerged, white-haired and slight, but with eyes that held the clarity of someone who'd spent decades listening to confession and parsing truth from deception. Connor Hayes, Father Ben said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet space. I wondered when you'd come. You know why I'm here? Father Ben gestured toward his office. I know everything, son. Grace told me 6 months ago. Come. They settled in the small office behind the sanctuary, Connor and the twins on a worn sofa, Bear lying at their feet. Father Ben moved to a safe built into the wall, worked the combination, and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with wax. Your wife was one of the bravest people I've ever known, Father Ben said, handing the envelope to Connor. She understood what her father was, and she planned for this moment. Connor broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. The original will, signed and witnessed, establishing the Hayes homestead as community trust land, supporting affidavits from the notary and witnesses, a geological survey showing the mineral deposits, and a handwritten note from Grace's grandmother, Helen. To my granddaughter, Grace, Helen had written in shaking script, this land is freedom. Never let it be sold for profit. Use it to help those who need healing. Your grandfather understood this. Your father never will. There was more. Financial records showing William's shell company transactions. Emails between William and Apex Oil executives discussing the development deal. Even a recorded phone conversation where William pressured Grace to sign over her rights, his voice cold and threatening as she refused. Father Ben watched Connor's face as he reviewed the evidence. Grace spent her last good months gathering all of this. She was preparing for war, even as cancer was killing her. Why didn't she tell me? Connor's voice came out rough. Why carry this alone? Because she knew you would have confronted William directly, Father Ben said gently, and she feared what that confrontation might cost. She wanted you alive and free to raise your children. So she built the case in secret and left you the weapons to fight when the time came. Liam leaned forward. Did Mom know she was dying? Father Ben's expression softened with sorrow. Yes, son, she knew, and she spent every remaining day making sure you'd be protected. Sophie was crying quietly, tears tracking down her cheeks. Bear moved to rest his head in her lap, offering wordless comfort. The girl's fingers worked through the dog's thick fur, seeking anchor in something solid and warm. Connor gathered the documents carefully. This proves everything. William's fraud, the real ownership, all of it. It proves motive and method, Father Ben agreed. But proving it in court against a man with William's resources, that's another matter entirely. We have a lawyer now, Connor said. Kelly Brennan, she's filing injunctions today. Good. Father Ben stood and moved to the window, looking out at the church garden where late autumn flowers still bloomed. But Connor, you need to understand something. William has been planning his countermoves for months. He knew Grace was gathering evidence. He knows you'll come at him with the truth. He's not going to surrender just because you have documentation. Then what do you think he'll do? Father Ben turned back, and Connor saw worry in the old priest's eyes. Whatever he has to. William Hartfield built his empire on the belief that anything can be bought or destroyed. When you threaten that empire, he doesn't just fight back, he annihilates. The warning hung in the air as Connor drove back toward the ranch, the original will and supporting documents secured in a waterproof case beside him. The afternoon had stretched into evening, shadows lengthening across the valley. Sophie had fallen asleep against Liam's shoulder in the back seat. Liam stared out the window, processing everything they'd learned. Bear remained alert in the passenger seat, but his attention kept returning to something Connor couldn't identify. The dog would look out the window, then back at Connor, a soft whine building in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Connor reached over to scratch behind Bear's ears. "Something bothering you?" The dog pressed his nose against the window, breath fogging the glass. Then Connor saw it. A black SUV, 3 cars back, maintaining steady distance. He changed lanes. The SUV changed lanes. He accelerated slightly. The SUV matched speed. "We're being followed," Connor said quietly. Liam sat up straighter. "What?" Connor's mind raced through options. Confront them? Lose them? Call the police? Each choice carried risks. He settled for taking an unexpected turn, heading away from the ranch toward a more populated area. The SUV followed for another mile, then abruptly peeled off, disappearing down a side road. Connor circled back slowly, watching mirrors, but the vehicle didn't reappear. Still, the message was clear. William knew their movements. He was tracking them, documenting them, building his case with surveillance photos and location data. They reached the ranch as twilight painted the mountains purple and gold. Connor had stopped at a hardware store, using precious cash reserves to buy a generator, basic tools, and supplies to make the house minimally habitable. Liam helped him unload while Sophie explored the property with Bear, the dog staying close to her like a living shadow. Connor was setting up the generator when he heard Bear barking from near the barn. Not alarm barking, excited, the discovery bark Connor had learned to recognize from their time together. He found Sophie and Bear at the barn's foundation, the same spot where the dog had unearthed the metal box. Bear was digging again, but at a different location, paws working through hard earth with determined focus. "Bear, that's enough," Connor started, but Sophie grabbed his arm. "Wait, Dad, look." She pointed to what Bear had uncovered. A tin box, old and rusted, partially buried. Connor knelt and worked it free from the soil. The lid resisted, then popped open to reveal contents wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with ribbon, addressed in Grace's teenage handwriting to Helen Hayes at the ranch address. Connor picked up the first bundle and untied the ribbon carefully. The letters spanned years, from Grace at 16 to Grace at 21. Each one detailed her life under William's control, her dreams of escape, her love for the ranch, and her desperate hope that someday she could return. "Dear Grandma Helen," one letter read, "Dad won't let me visit this summer. He says you're filling my head with dangerous ideas about rejecting wealth and embracing simplicity. But I don't think wanting to be happy is dangerous. I think it's the only sane thing left in this world. I miss the ranch so much it hurts." Sophie read over Connor's shoulder, her voice breaking. "Mom wanted to come here. She begged to come here." Connor continued reading, letter after letter revealing the depth of William's manipulation. How he'd isolated Grace from her grandmother. How he'd monitored her phone calls and controlled her friendships. How he'd threatened to cut off all support if she didn't comply with his vision for her future. Then came the letters from Grace's college years. "I met someone today, a soldier named Connor Hayes. He was buying coffee at the campus cafe and we started talking. He's different from anyone Dad would approve of. He listens instead of commands. He asks questions instead of giving orders. I think I'm falling in love." Later letters chronicled their courtship, Connor's deployment, their engagement, and finally the letter that must have been one of the last Grace sent to her grandmother. "I'm getting married next month. Connor proposed and I said yes without hesitation. Dad called me a fool, said if I marry a poor soldier, I'm dead to him. But Grandma, I'd rather be dead to him and alive to myself. I choose Connor. I choose love. I choose the dream of someday bringing our children to the ranch and teaching them what you taught me. That freedom is worth more than any fortune." Connor's hands shook as he read. Bear pressed against his leg, grounding him. Sophie and Liam sat close, connected by grief and the ghost of their mother speaking across years. "She never stopped fighting for this," Liam said quietly, "even when he cut her off, even when it cost her everything." The revelation settled over them like snow, quiet and transformative. Grace hadn't just left them documentation and legal weapons. She'd left them her story, the narrative of a woman who chose authenticity over approval, love over luxury, and paid for that choice with isolation and eventual death. Connor gathered the letters carefully and stood. We need to show these to Kelly. They prove the pattern of William's control. Show he's been manipulating Grace her whole life. They walked back to the house, but Bear stopped suddenly at the porch steps, his body going rigid. A low growl built in his chest, focused on the front door. Connor saw it immediately. The door stood slightly ajar, though he'd locked it when they left. Fresh mud on the porch, and inside the faint sound of movement. "Kids, get behind the truck," Connor ordered quietly. He handed Liam his phone. "If I'm not out in 2 minutes, call 911. "Dad?" "No," Sophie whispered. But Connor was already moving. Bear beside him, both of them falling into the tactical synchronization they'd developed overseas. Connor pushed the door open slowly, scanning corners, listening for threat indicators. The movement came from the back room. Connor advanced carefully, Bear slightly ahead, when a voice called out, "Easy, man, I'm not armed." Connor rounded the corner to find a man in his late 30s sitting on the floor, hands raised, looking exhausted and scared. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, civilian clothes, but something about his posture suggested military training. "Who are you?" Connor demanded. "Travis Reed." The man's voice shook slightly. "I'm the guy William Hartfield paid to spy on you." Connor didn't lower his guard. "Talk fast." Travis took a breath. 2 weeks ago, Hartfield's people approached me, said they needed surveillance on a custody case, offered me $2,000 to photograph the property, document unsafe conditions, anything that could prove you're an unfit parent. He gestured toward a camera bag on the floor. I took the job. I needed the money. "So you broke into my house?" Travis shook his head quickly. "I was just supposed to take exterior photos, but when I got here and saw the place, saw you with your kids, saw that boy and the way he protects them, I realized what I was really doing. I'm helping a rich bastard steal kids from a vet who's trying his best." Connor studied the man carefully. Bear hadn't attacked, hadn't even maintained aggressive posture. The dog sat at alert but calm, which meant he didn't sense immediate threat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have kids too," Travis said quietly. "Lost custody 2 years ago when my PTSD got bad. My ex has them now, and I barely get to see them. I've been broke and desperate, and I've done things I'm ashamed of. But helping Hartfield do to you what was done to me? I can't live with that." Connor made a decision. He lowered his hands and took a step back. "What were you supposed to photograph?" Travis reached slowly for the camera bag and pulled out a folder. Photos, the broken windows, the sagging roof, the unsafe stairs. Hartfield wanted evidence the house is dangerous, that you can't provide adequate shelter. Connor looked through the photos, seeing the ranch through hostile eyes. Every broken board, every gap in the walls, every sign of poverty and struggle. "He wanted more," Travis continued. "Wanted me to stage photos making it look like Bear was aggressive. Get shots of you having a PTSD episode if I could catch one. Build a narrative that you're volatile and the kids are in danger." Connor's jaw tightened. "Were you outside last night? The cigarette butts?" Travis nodded, ashamed. "I was watching, taking notes on your routine." They wanted a full surveillance report. Sophie and Liam appeared in the doorway, drawn by voices. They looked at Travis with wariness, then at Connor for guidance. "This is the man your grandfather hired to build his case against us," Connor said. "He's telling us about it." "Why?" Liam asked, stepping closer. "Why would you help us?" Travis met the boy's eyes. "Because I know what it's like to lose your kids. And I know what it's like when nobody believes you're good enough to be their father. Your dad is trying. That should count for something." Connor made another decision, one that surprised even himself. "You said you needed money. You still need it?" Travis hesitated. "Yeah, I'm broke. Behind on everything." Connor pulled his wallet and counted out $200, nearly all the cash he had left. "Take this. Get food. Get a hotel room for a few nights. And tomorrow you're going to give a statement to our lawyer about everything Hartfield hired you to do." Travis stared at the money like Connor had handed him a fortune. "I can't take this." "You can and you will," Connor said. "And then you're going to help us prove what William Hartfield really is." The confession Travis made to Kelly the next morning laid bare the full scope of William's plan. Not just surveillance, but character assassination. Manufactured evidence. False witnesses prepared to testify about Connor's supposed violent outbursts. A network of corruption extending into the court system itself. Kelly recorded everything, her expression growing darker as Travis detailed the conspiracy. When he finished, she looked at Connor with something approaching awe. "You gave him money after he admitted to spying on you?" "He needed help," Connor said simply, "and we need him." Kelly shook her head. "Most people would have turned him in, had him arrested. Most people didn't serve with men who made mistakes and deserve second chances," Connor replied. "Travis is a weapon someone else tried to use against us. Now he's our witness." Over the next 2 days, they built their case. Kelly filed injunctions. Father Ben provided testimony about Grace's intentions. Travis gave a sworn statement about William's surveillance operation. And Connor, against every instinct telling him to wait, made a decision. "I want to talk to William," he told Kelly. "Offer him a way out." Kelly looked at him like he'd suggested jumping off a cliff. "That's insane. He'll use anything you say against you." "Maybe," Connor agreed. "But Grace's letter said to trust my instincts. My instincts say William needs to understand what he's really fighting for. Not land, not money, his grandchildren." Kelly was silent for a long moment. "If you do this, I can't protect you. Anything you say outside my presence can be used in court." "I understand." Connor called William's office and somehow, miraculously, got through. The secretary seemed surprised when Connor identified himself, even more surprised when William agreed to a meeting. They met in William's penthouse office overlooking downtown Missoula. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the mountains beyond, autumn colors brilliant in afternoon light. William sat behind a desk of polished mahogany, every inch the corporate titan, while Connor stood in his work jacket and jeans, looking exactly like what he was. A man with nothing to lose. Connor slid the copy of Helen's will across the desk. "This is the original will, filed and notarized. Your development deal violates its terms. The land can't be sold for private development." William barely glanced at it. "Legal documents can be challenged." "This one has been on file for 15 years, Connor said, "along with geological surveys, mineral rights documentation, and witness testimony. Your entire deal with Apex Oil is built on fraud." William's expression didn't change. Bold accusation. "Can you prove it in court?" "We have Grace's documentation," Connor continued. "Her letters, her recordings of your threats, Father Ben's testimony. And now we have Travis Reed, who's willing to testify about the surveillance operation you hired him for." For the first time, something flickered in William's eyes. "Travis Reed is a desperate addict. No judge will believe him." "Maybe," Connor acknowledged. "Or maybe a judge will see a pattern. A powerful man willing to lightly cheat and manipulate to get what he wants, even if it means traumatizing his own grandchildren." William stood, moving to the windows. His reflection in the glass looked tired, older than his years. "Those children deserve better than you can provide." "They deserve love," Connor said. "Security that comes from being wanted, not from being property. Grace chose me because I could give them that. She trusted me with her life, with her children, with her dream." "Grace was a fool," William said coldly. "She threw away every advantage I gave her for what? A fantasy about simple living and authentic connection? She died poor and broken because of those choices." Connor felt anger rise but kept his voice steady. "She died knowing she was loved. Can you say the same?" The question landed like a physical blow. William turned from the window, and for a moment Connor saw past the armor of wealth and control to something raw underneath. Grief, maybe, or regret, or simply the exhaustion of a man who'd spent his whole life building walls that left him isolated inside them. "I'm offering you a way out," Connor said quietly. "Drop the custody petition. Let Sophie and Liam stay with me. You can have supervised visitation. We'll work out something that lets you be part of their lives. But you don't get to take them from me." William's mask slammed back into place. "And if I refuse, then we go to court," Connor said. "And I expose every piece of your fraud. The forged documents, the illegal mineral rights sale, the surveillance, the threats that contributed to Grace's death. You'll lose the land deal, probably face federal charges, and Sophie and Liam will learn exactly what kind of man their grandfather is." William returned to his desk, sitting down with calculated calm. "You think you've won something here? But Connor, you're a disabled veteran with no resources, no connections, and a documented history of PTSD. I own this county. I've already ensured the original judge recused herself. The new judge is an old friend. Do you really think your evidence matters against that?" The words confirmed Kelly's worst fears. The game was rigged, the system corrupted. William had been preparing for this confrontation since the day Grace died, building legal traps and buying influence while Connor struggled just to survive his grief. "You're telling me you've bought a judge?" Connor said slowly. "I'm telling you that justice is a commodity like anything else," William replied. "And I can afford more of it than you can." Connor stood, feeling something cold settle in his chest. "Then I guess we'll see who the system really serves." He left without another word, Bear waiting for him in the lobby. The dog fell into step beside him, sensing the tension radiating from Connor like heat. They walked to the truck in silence, Connor's mind replaying William's casual admission of corruption, the certainty in his voice that money could overcome truth. Kelly was waiting at her office. One look at Connor's face told her how the meeting had gone. He admitted to buying the judge? "Basically," Connor said justice is a commodity, that he owns this county. Kelly pulled up her computer. Judge Harold Benson. He recused himself from a case last year after allegations of bias. Nothing proven, but the pattern is there. She looked at Connor. "We can appeal to federal court, but that takes time we don't have." "The hearing is tomorrow," Connor said. "How do we fight this?" Kelly leaned back thinking. "We present our evidence anyway. Force it onto the record. Even if Benson rules against you, we create grounds for appeal. And sometimes, Connor, judges surprise you. Even corrupt ones have moments of conscience." That night, back at the ranch, Connor couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch while the twins slept inside, watching stars wheel overhead in patterns that had guided travelers for millennia. Bear lay beside him, warm presence in the cold night. Connor's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You should have taken the offer. Now you lose everything." He stared at the message, then deleted it. Fear was a weapon William wielded expertly, but Connor had learned in combat that fear only had power if you let it control you. He'd been afraid in Kandahar, afraid every day, and he'd still done his job. He'd been afraid when Grace got sick, and he'd still held her hand through every treatment. Fear didn't mean failure. It just meant the stakes were real. Movement at the edge of the clearing caught his attention. Bear was on his feet instantly, body rigid, focused on the tree line. Connor stood slowly, hand on the dog's collar. A figure emerged from the shadows. Travis Reed, looking haggard and frightened. "They found me," Travis said without preamble. "Hartfield's people said if I testify tomorrow, I'll never see my kids again. That they'll make sure the courts know I'm unreliable. That I'll lose even supervised visitation." Connor felt his stomach drop. "Are you backing out?" Travis's hand shook. "I want to help you, man, but my kids are all I have left. If I lose them completely, I don't know what I'll do." Connor understood that fear, lived inside it every day. He stepped closer. "Travis, I get it. Your kids come first, always. But think about what you're teaching them if you let men like Hartfield win through intimidation." "Easy for you to say," Travis shot back. "You still have your kids." "For now," Connor acknowledged. "But if Hartfield wins tomorrow, I lose them too. And then what's to stop him from doing this to someone else? How many fathers has he already destroyed?" Travis looked away, conflict written across his face. The night wind moved through the pines, cold and carrying the scent of coming snow. "I'll think about it," Travis said finally. "That's all I can promise." He disappeared back into the darkness, leaving Connor and Bear alone under the stars. Connor knew he'd lost Travis as a witness. Fear was too powerful, the stakes too personal. He couldn't blame the man for choosing his children over principle. Inside, Connor checked on Sophie and Liam, both sleeping fitfully. He sat between their beds, watching them in the dim light from the hallway. Grace's children, his children, the family he'd built from love instead of calculation. The hearing tomorrow would determine everything. William's money against Connor's truth, corruption against evidence, a system rigged against an outcome that should have been obvious to anyone with eyes to see that these kids belonged with their father. Connor must have dozed because he woke to find Bear pawing at him urgently, a strange sound in the dog's throat. Not alarm, something else. Confusion, maybe, or concern. Connor followed Bear to the front window and looked out. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and the clearing was empty. No truck, no Bear's food bowls, no sign of the dog's favorite stick he'd been carrying around. Then Connor understood. This wasn't his confusion, this was a memory. Bear had done this before, in Afghanistan, right before an IE detonated. The dog's internal sense that something was wrong, even when nothing obvious had changed. Connor checked his phone. 6 a.m. The hearing was at 9. He went to wake the twins and found their rooms empty, beds made. A note on Sophie's pillow in her careful handwriting. Dad, we went to get Bear checked out at the vet. He seemed sick last night. Didn't want to worry you. Back soon. Love you. Connor's blood went cold. He called Sophie's cell. Straight to voicemail. Liam's phone the same. He ran outside, searching the property. The truck was there. They hadn't driven anywhere. He was reaching for his phone to call 911 when it rang. Unknown number. Connor answered, already knowing what he'd hear. Good morning, Connor. William Hartfield's voice came through, smooth and cold. I have your children. They're safe. For now. But if you show up at that hearing today, if you continue this fight, I'll make sure you never see them again. Drop the case, sign over the land, walk away, or lose them forever. The line went dead. Connor stood in the clearing as the sun rose over the mountains, phone still pressed to his ear. The world narrowing to a single impossible choice. Fight and lose his children. Surrender and betray everything Grace had died trying to protect. Bear pressed against his leg, whining softly, sensing the crisis even if he couldn't understand its source. Connor's hands shook, not from PTSD this time, but from pure rage mixed with helplessness. William had made his final move, and it was checkmate. 2 hours until the hearing. 2 hours to find Sophie and Liam. 2 hours to somehow save everything that mattered while the system he'd trusted to deliver justice revealed itself as just another weapon in the hands of those with money to wield it. Connor looked at Bear, at the ranch house Grace had loved, at the mountains standing eternal and indifferent to human suffering. Then he made a decision that would change everything. He called Kelly Brennan. When she answered, he said only 3 words. They took my kids. And in that moment, the gathering storm finally broke. Connor's world had narrowed to a single truth that burned through everything else. His children were gone. William Hartfield had taken them, and every second spent standing in the clearing was another second they were in danger. Bear paced tight circles around Connor's legs, sensing the crisis, whining with urgency that mirrored the panic trying to claw its way up Connor's throat. Kelly answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with instant alertness. What happened? They took Sophie and Liam, Connor forced out through clenched teeth. William called, said if I show up at the hearing, I'll never see them again. A pause, then Kelly's voice came back hard and certain. Where are you right now? The ranch. Stay there. I'm calling the police. This is kidnapping. Federal crime. William just ended his own game. Connor wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that the system William claimed to own would somehow turn against him for crossing this line. But the cold calculation in William's voice kept replaying. A man that confident didn't make mistakes. He'd planned this, prepared for it, probably had a dozen alibis and explanations ready. The sound of an engine broke through Connor's spiral. He spun toward the road, hand instinctively moving to Bear's collar. A vehicle was approaching fast, kicking up dust. Not William's luxury SUV, something smaller, familiar. Kelly's sedan skidded to a stop in the clearing. She burst out, phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly to someone. Behind her, the passenger door opened. Sophie and Liam climbed out. Connor's knees nearly buckled. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled them both against his chest, feeling their solid weight, their warmth, their breath against his neck as they wrapped thin arms around him. Dad, we're okay, Sophie said, voice muffled against his shoulder. We're okay. What happened? Connor pulled back just enough to check them for injuries, hands shaking as they moved over their arms, their faces. Where were you? Liam spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other. We woke up early and Bear seemed sick. We were going to walk to the main road to get cell service and call you. But Ms. Brennan was already here. She said she had a bad feeling and came to check on us. Kelly ended her call and approached. I couldn't sleep last night. Something about William's confidence bothered me, so I drove out here at 5 a.m., found the kids trying to walk to town, and brought them straight back. Connor looked at her, understanding, crystallizing. The phone call, William saying he had the kids, it was a bluff. A psychological operation, Kelly agreed. He knew you'd panic, knew you'd either miss the hearing trying to find them or show up so rattled you couldn't present your case. Classic intimidation tactic. But how did he know they'd be gone this morning? Connor's tactical mind was already working through the logistics. How did he time it perfectly? Sophie pulled out her phone. I posted on Instagram last night that Bear wasn't feeling well, that we were worried about him. She looked ashamed. Grandpa William follows my account. He must have seen it and assumed we'd take Bear to the vet this morning. Connor felt rage and relief warring in his chest. William had gambled on his granddaughter's social media habits and the predictable love of children for a sick dog. It almost worked. Another 10 minutes and Connor would have been tearing through the valley searching for them instead of preparing for court. Kelly checked her watch. We have 90 minutes before the hearing. Everyone in the truck. Now. The drive to the courthouse passed in a blur of last-minute preparation. Kelly ran through the sequence of testimony, the evidence they'd present, the arguments she'd make. Connor half listened, his mind still processing how close he'd come to losing everything because of a bluff and a social media post. The Cascade County Courthouse stood 3 stories of weathered stone in downtown Missoula, built in an era when civic buildings were designed to inspire respect for the law. Connor had never felt less respect for any institution as he climbed the wide steps, Kelly on one side, the twins on the other, Bear pulling slightly ahead as if clearing the path. Inside, the hallway smelled of floor polish and old wood. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors. Lawyers in expensive suits moved between courtrooms, carrying briefcases and confident expressions that came from knowing which judges could be influenced and which opponents could be crushed. Kelly led them to courtroom 3. Through the small window in the door, Connor could see William Hartfield already seated at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they billed $800 an hour. William sat perfectly still, hands folded, expression carved from granite. He didn't look like a man whose intimidation tactic had failed. He looked like a man playing a longer game. The gallery was packed. Connor recognized reporters, curious locals drawn by the David versus Goliath narrative, and several faces from William's circle. No one from Connor's side except Father Ben Crowley, who sat in the back row in his clerical collar, rosary beads moving slowly through his weathered fingers. All rise, the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. The Honorable Judge Harold Benson presiding. The judge entered from his chambers. 60-something, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He moved with the careful dignity of someone aware he was being watched, assessed, judged, even as he prepared to render judgment. Be seated. Judge Benson settled behind the bench and surveyed the courtroom with eyes that revealed nothing. We're here for emergency custody petition, Hartfield versus Hayes. Counselors, are we ready to proceed? William's lead attorney stood. Douglas Pike, tall and polished, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never lost a case he was paid enough to win. Ready for petitioner, Your Honor. Kelly rose. Ready for respondent, Your Honor. And we'd like to enter several motions before testimony begins. Pike's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, we object to any procedural delays. This is an emergency hearing regarding child welfare. Judge Benson looked at Kelly over his glasses. Ms. Brennan, what motions? Kelly laid out her argument with surgical precision. Motion to dismiss based on fraudulent premises. Motion to introduce evidence of petitioner's criminal fraud regarding mineral rights. Motion to subpoena petitioner's communications regarding surveillance of respondent. Each motion supported by documentation, filed properly, impossible to ignore. Pike objected to everything. Irrelevant, prejudicial, outside the scope of custody determination. His voice never wavered, but Connor could see the calculation happening. William's lawyers hadn't expected Kelly to be this prepared. Judge Benson reviewed the motions in silence. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, he looked up. I'll allow the evidence regarding Mr. Hartfield's business dealings as it speaks to character and motivation. But Ms. Brennan, keep it focused on custody fitness. This isn't a fraud trial. Yet, Kelly said quietly, taking her seat, the word hung in the air like a promise or a threat. Pike called his first witness, a child psychologist named Dr. Ellen Morrison, who'd never met Connor or the twins but had plenty of opinions about the psychological damage of being raised by a parent with PTSD. She spoke in measured tones about attachment disorders, about the need for stability, about research showing children of traumatized veterans faced higher risks of anxiety and depression. Kelly's cross-examination was brief and brutal. Dr. Morrison, have you ever evaluated Mr. Hayes personally? No, but based on the documentation provided. So your testimony is based entirely on information provided by the petitioner? I reviewed his medical records. Records he provided. Did you speak with Mr. Hayes' therapist? His support group? Anyone who actually knows how he functions as a parent? I relied on the clinical documentation. Kelly let that answer settle. No further questions. Pike called more witnesses. A financial analyst who testified Connor's disability income was insufficient for raising 2 teenagers. a property inspector who described the ranch house as structurally unsound and potentially dangerous. Each witness built the narrative that Connor, despite his best intentions, simply couldn't provide what Sophie and Liam needed. Connor sat through it all, hands folded on the table to hide their tremor. Sophie and Liam sat in the first row behind him, close enough that he could feel their presence like an anchor. Bear lay at his feet under the table, warm weight against his boots. When Pike finally rested his case, Judge Benson called a 15-minute recess. Connor stepped into the hallway with Kelly, who looked grimmer than he'd seen her. They built a strong narrative, she admitted. Financial instability, inadequate housing, mental health concerns. It's exactly what I expected, but it's effective. So we're losing? Kelly met his eyes. We're behind, but Connor, testimony from the kids can change everything, if they're willing to speak. They're willing, Connor said. We talked about it. They know what's at stake. Then we let them tell their truth. Kelly squeezed his shoulder, and we trust that somewhere under that judicial robe, Harold Benson still has a conscience. Back in the courtroom, Kelly called her first witness. Father Ben Crowley took the stand with quiet dignity, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Kelly walked him through his history with the Hayes family, how he'd known Grace since she was a child, how he'd watched William control and isolate her, how Grace had spent her final months gathering evidence of her father's fraud and planning for her children's protection. Father, did Grace ever express concerns about Connor's ability to parent? Never, Father Ben said firmly. She trusted him completely. She knew he struggled with war trauma, but she saw that as proof of his courage, not evidence of weakness. Grace believed Connor was exactly the father Sophie and Liam needed. Pike's cross-examination tried to paint Father Ben as biased, as someone with a grudge against William, but the old priest remained unshakable. When asked if he had any personal animosity toward Mr. Hartfield, Father Ben responded quietly, I have pity for him. He drove away everyone who loved him in pursuit of control. That's not something to hate, it's something to grieve. The answer seemed to land on William like a physical blow. For the first time, Connor saw the man's composure crack, just slightly. A tightening around the eyes, a shift in posture. Kelly called Connor next. He walked to the stand, feeling exposed, every eye in the courtroom assessing him. The bailiff offered the Bible and Connor placed his hand on it, feeling the worn leather, thinking of all the people who'd sworn oaths on this same book and whether those oaths had meant anything. The questions Kelly asked were straightforward. His service record, his injuries, his PTSD diagnosis and treatment, his relationship with his children. Connor answered honestly, not trying to minimize his struggles or pretend he was something he wasn't. Yes, I have nightmares. Yes, sometimes my hands shake. Yes, there are days when getting out of bed feels like climbing a mountain. But I'm in therapy. I take my medication. I lean on my support system. And every single day, I show up for Sophie and Liam. Pike's cross-examination was designed to draw blood. He pulled up medical records, incident reports from Connor's service, documentation of panic attacks. He presented each piece of evidence as proof of instability, of danger, of a man too broken to be trusted with children. Mr. Hayes, how many times in the past month have you experienced PTSD episodes? Connor met Pike's eyes, 4 that I would classify as episodes, dozens of smaller moments that I managed before they became episodes. And during these episodes, you become disoriented, potentially violent. I've never been violent toward my children, Connor said, each word deliberate. Never. Not once, not ever. But you can't guarantee it won't happen. I can guarantee that I love them more than my own life, that I would die before I let harm come to them, and that every person in this courtroom who's never experienced combat trauma has no idea what it takes to function through it while raising kids alone. The courtroom went silent. Pike opened his mouth, closed it, then pivoted to financial questions. But something had shifted. Connor could feel it in the stillness, in the way even the reporters had stopped typing. Kelly's redirect was simple. Mr. Hayes, why are you fighting so hard for this? Connor looked at William, then at his children. Because Grace trusted me. Because Sophie and Liam are my family. Because walking away would teach them that love surrenders when things get hard. I won't teach them that. He stepped down and returned to his seat. Bear's tail thumped once against the floor. Approval, solidarity, the simple communication they'd built over years of mutual dependence. Kelly stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call Sophie Hayes to the stand. Sophie rose from her seat, small and pale in the dress they'd bought at a thrift store for this moment. She walked to the stand with her head up, and Connor's heart broke with pride and fear in equal measure. 13 years old and having to defend her own family in front of strangers. The bailiff lowered the Bible and Sophie placed her hand on it, her voice barely audible, as she swore to tell the truth. Kelly approached gently. Sophie, I know this is scary. Take your time with your answers. Can you tell the court how long you've lived with your father? My whole life, Sophie said, except when he was deployed. Then Mom took care of us until Dad came home. How would you describe your father as a parent? Sophie's hands twisted in her lap. He's the best dad I could imagine. He makes breakfast every morning even when he barely slept. He helps with homework even though math makes his head hurt from his injury. He sits with me when I have nightmares about Mom. She stopped, gathering herself. He never makes me feel like I'm too much or too hard to deal with. Has your father ever hurt you? No, never. Sometimes he gets really quiet when he's having a bad day, but he tells me that's what's happening. He doesn't hide it or pretend. He teaches me that struggling is normal and asking for help is brave. Kelly nodded. Sophie, your grandfather has suggested you'd be better off living with him. What do you think about that? For the first time, Sophie looked directly at William. Her voice gained strength. Grandpa William didn't love my mom. He controlled her. There's a difference. Pike shot to his feet. Objection. The witness is making assumptions about. She's testifying to her observations, Kelly cut in. Her experience of her family. Judge Benson studied Sophie carefully. I'll allow it. Continue, young lady. Sophie turned back to Kelly, but her words were aimed at William. Mom had letters, dozens of them, begging her grandma to let her visit the ranch. Grandpa William wouldn't let her. He said Grandma Helen was filling her head with dangerous ideas. But the only dangerous idea was that Mom deserved to make her own choices. The gallery stirred. Several reporters were typing frantically. Mom chose Dad because he listened to her, because he loved her for who she was, not who he wanted her to be. Sophie's voice cracked, and Grandpa William never forgave her for that. He'd rather have us than let Dad have us, even though he doesn't actually want to be our grandpa. He just wants to win. William's face had gone pale. Pike was objecting, but Judge Benson waved him down, his attention fixed entirely on Sophie. When your mother was sick, Sophie, did she ever talk about what she wanted for you and your brother? Sophie nodded, tears now streaming down her cheeks. She said, stay with Dad. She said he would protect us. She said Grandpa William would try to take us, but we should never forget that Dad loved us, and that was all that mattered. Kelly let that statement rest. Then she pulled out the metal box, the one Bear had discovered. With the court's permission, I'd like to enter into evidence a letter from Grace Hayes to her children, written shortly before her death. Pike objected strenuously, but Judge Benson allowed it. Kelly handed Sophie the letter, and the girl read it aloud, her voice shaking but clear. My darling Sophie and Liam, if you're reading this, I'm gone and your grandfather is trying to take you from Dad. Don't let him. Connor Hayes is the best man I've ever known. He's not perfect. He has scars inside and out. But he will love you with everything he has. He will show up for you. He will never stop fighting for you. Trust him. Trust Bear. And remember that the ranch isn't just land. It's freedom. It's the choice to live honestly instead of performing for approval. I love you both. Be brave. Mom. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophie folded the letter carefully, tears dripping onto the paper. Kelly retrieved it gently and turned to Judge Benson. No further questions, Your Honor. Pike's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to suggest Sophie had been coached, that she was too young to understand the full situation. But every question he asked seemed to make things worse. Sophie answered with the simple honesty of a child who'd lost her mother and refused to lose her father too. When Sophie stepped down, she didn't return to the gallery. She walked straight to Connor and wrapped her arms around him. He held her while she cried, aware of every eye in the courtroom but caring about none of them. Kelly gave them a moment, then called her final witness, Liam Hayes. Connor felt Sophie stiffen. They hadn't planned for Liam to testify. He was too young, too fragile. But the boy was already standing, moving toward the witness stand with determination that reminded Connor of Grace. Kelly approached carefully. Liam, we didn't discuss you testifying. Are you sure you want to do this? I have to say something, Liam replied. His voice was quiet but steady. Something Mom made me promise to keep secret, but I can't keep it anymore. Connor's stomach dropped. What was Liam talking about? The boy took the oath and sat down, his hands gripping the arms of the witness chair. Your Honor, I have the same heart condition my mom had. Cardiomyopathy. I found out 3 weeks before she died. The courtroom erupted. Connor was on his feet, Kelly beside him, both trying to process what Liam had just revealed. William looked stricken. Judge Benson banged his gavel for order. Liam waited until the room quieted. Mom made me promise not to tell anyone. She didn't want Dad to worry when he was already dealing with so much. But I'm telling now because everyone needs to understand what killed her. He looked at William. It wasn't just cancer. The doctor said stress made everything worse, that her heart couldn't handle the fear and pressure. Grandpa William threatened her, told her he'd take us away if she didn't give him the ranch. 3 days later, her heart problems started getting bad. Pike stood. Your Honor, this is speculation from a child. It's testimony from someone who was there, Kelly countered, who heard the conversations, who watched his mother die. Judge Benson leaned forward. Young man, you said you have the same condition. Are you receiving treatment? Yes, sir. Dad takes me to a cardiologist in Missoula every month. The doctor says as long as I avoid stress and take my medication, I should be fine. The boy's hands were shaking now, but he pressed on. But if I have to go live with Grandpa William, pretend to be someone I'm not, that's stress. Living in that big house, following all his rules about how to dress and talk and act, that would be stress. The doctor says stress could kill me just like it killed Mom. The words landed like grenades. William stood abruptly, his carefully maintained composure finally shattering. That's not fair. I never wanted Grace to. You wanted her to obey, Liam said, his voice gaining strength. You wanted her to give up everything she loved because you thought you knew better. And when she wouldn't, you made her life so hard it killed her. William's attorney pulled him back down, whispering urgently. But the damage was done. The truth was out. And it was written across William's face that he knew it. Judge Benson sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. This court will take a 30-minute recess. All parties remain available. In the hallway, Connor pulled Liam aside. Why didn't you tell me? About your heart. Liam's facade crumbled. His thin shoulders shook. Because I was scared you'd look at me like I was broken. Like I was going to die and leave you too. Connor knelt in front of his son, taking the boy's face in his hands. You could never be broken to me. You're my son, and we face hard things together, remember? No secrets. Not about this. I'm sorry, Liam whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for. Connor pulled him close. You were so brave in there. Sophie joined the embrace, then Bear pushed his way into the middle of them, the dog's presence grounding them all. They stood like that in the courthouse hallway while lawyers and reporters streamed past, a small family holding on to each other while the system decided their fate. Kelly emerged from a side conference room, her expression unreadable. Judge Benson wants to see both attorneys in chambers. She looked at Connor. This is unusual. Could be good, could be very bad. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Connor paced the hallway with Bear while the twins sat on a bench, holding hands, exhausted from the emotional expenditure of their testimony. Father Ben had joined them, offering quiet prayers and solid presence. Finally, Kelly and Pike emerged from the judge's chambers. Pike looked like a man who'd swallowed glass. Kelly's expression was carefully neutral as she approached Connor. Benson wants everyone back in the courtroom. He's ready to rule. The walk back through the courtroom doors felt like approaching a firing squad. Connor took his seat, the twins behind him, Bear under the table. The gallery had filled even more during the recess, word having spread that a verdict was imminent. Judge Benson entered and everyone rose. When he sat, his expression was grave. He looked at the assembled crowd, then specifically at William, then at Connor and the children. I've presided over a family court for 23 years, Benson began. I've seen every variation of custody dispute, parents fighting over children as proxies for marital grievances, grandparents seeking control for noble and ignoble reasons. And in every case, I'm tasked with determining what serves the best interest of the child. He picked up a sheet of paper, then set it down again. This case presented itself as straightforward. A disabled veteran with documented PTSD and insufficient income versus a wealthy, stable grandparent able to provide every material advantage. On paper, the choice seems obvious. Connor felt his heart sinking. This was it. The system he'd trusted was about to fail them. But I didn't become a judge to rule on paper, Benson continued. I became a judge to pursue justice, and justice requires looking past the surface to the truth underneath. He turned to William. Mr. Hartfield, your granddaughter just testified that you controlled and isolated her mother. Your grandson just testified that your pressure contributed to his mother's death. And sitting in my chambers, I had to ask myself what kind of man uses his wealth and influence to wage war against the father of his grandchildren. William started to speak, but Benson held up a hand. I also had to ask myself about my own role. Your attorney reminded me in chambers that we've known each other for many years, that I've benefited from your generosity to various charitable causes. He was, I believe, reminding me that I owe you consideration. Pike looked uncomfortable. The gallery held its breath. And he's right, Benson said. I do owe you consideration. The same consideration I owe every person who appears before me. No more, no less. He turned to Connor. Mr. Hayes, you have PTSD. You live on limited income. Your housing situation is suboptimal at best. By traditional metrics, you face significant challenges as a single parent. But your children don't measure you by traditional metrics. They measure you by showing up, by honesty, by love. And by those measures, you exceed any standard I could set. Connor's throat tightened. Sophie gripped the railing in front of her. This court finds no evidence that Connor Hayes presents a danger to his children. This court finds substantial evidence that removing these children from their father would cause significant psychological and potentially physical harm. The judge looked directly at Liam, especially given the medical testimony about stress-related cardiomyopathy. Therefore, Judge Benson picked up his gavel. The emergency custody petition is denied. Full custody remains with Connor Hayes. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Sophie's cry of relief cut through the stunned silence. Liam was crying. Connor sat frozen, unable to process that they'd won. They'd actually won. However, Benson continued, raising his voice over the growing noise, I am ordering supervised visitation for William Hartfield. These are his grandchildren, and they deserve the opportunity to have a relationship with him if he can demonstrate the capacity to put their needs above his own interests. He looked at William again. Mr. Hartfield, I strongly suggest you use that opportunity for reflection. Your daughter died still loving you despite everything you'd done. Your grandchildren might offer you the same grace if you prove worthy of it. Benson stood. This court is adjourned. The gallery erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. William sat motionless at his table while his attorneys gathered papers with mechanical efficiency. Connor turned to find Sophie and Liam vaulting over the railing to reach him. They collided with him in a tangle of arms and tears and overwhelming relief. Kelly joined them, her professional composure finally cracking into a broad smile. We did it. Against every odd, we actually did it. You did it? Connor corrected. You believed when I couldn't. Your kids did it, Kelly said. Their courage made the difference. Bear barked once, loud and joyful, and Connor laughed through tears. Okay. And Bear definitely helped. Father Ben approached and placed a hand on Connor's shoulder. Grace is smiling, son. I know she is. Connor looked up to see William standing alone across the courtroom. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Connor didn't see the corporate titan or the controlling father. He saw an old man who'd built an empire and destroyed a family in the process. A man facing the consequences of choices that couldn't be undone. On impulse, Connor stood and walked toward him. William's attorneys moved to intercept, but William waved them off. The two men faced each other in the emptying courtroom. You won, William said quietly. His voice carried no anger, just exhaustion, just defeat. I didn't want to fight you, Connor replied. Grace didn't want me to fight you. She wanted you to be part of their lives. She just wanted it to be real, not controlled. William looked past Connor to where Sophie and Liam stood watching. I was so afraid of losing them the way I lost Grace. I thought control would protect them. Control isn't protection, Connor said. It's a prison. Your daughter knew that. Your grandchildren know it too. Silence stretched between them. Then William spoke again, so quietly Connor almost missed it. She really chose you because she loved you? Connor thought of Grace in the hospital, Grace reading to the twins, Grace laughing at his terrible jokes. Every day, he said, she chose love every single day. Something broke in William's expression. Not dramatically, just a small fracture in the armor he'd worn for so long. I don't know how to be what they need. Then learn, Connor said. The supervised visits, use them, listen instead of direct, ask instead of tell. They'll meet you halfway if you're willing to walk toward them honestly. William nodded once, a gesture so small it was almost imperceptible. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, his expensive shoes clicking on marble floors, his attorneys trailing behind like an honor guard for a retreating general. Connor returned to his children, Bear pushed between them, tail wagging so hard his entire body swayed. Sophie and Liam were talking over each other, relief and joy making them almost manic. "Can we go home?" Sophie asked. "To the ranch?" "Yeah," Connor said. "Let's go home." They walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine that felt brighter than it had any right to be. The mountain air was crisp with the promise of winter, but for the first time in months, Connor felt warmth that came from inside, from hope, from the simple truth that his family was intact. The drive back to the ranch was different from the terror-stricken journey that morning. Liam fell asleep against Sophie's shoulder. Bear watched the passing landscape with contentment. Kelly had promised to file all the protective orders for the land by end of day, ensuring William's fraudulent deal would be blocked permanently. As they climbed into the mountains, Connor thought about Grace's letter. Trust yourself, trust Bear, trust that broken things can be made beautiful. She'd been right, about all of it. The ranch would need work. His PTSD would require ongoing management. Money would be tight, but they had won the right to face those challenges together, as a family, on their own terms. The homestead appeared through the trees, still broken, still waiting, but now it represented possibility instead of desperation. A place where healing could happen, where a legacy of freedom could take root and grow. Connor parked the truck and sat for a moment, looking at the house Grace had loved. Sophie and Liam woke and followed his gaze. "We're going to fix it up," Liam said. "Make it beautiful like Mom wanted." "We are," Connor agreed, "together." Bear barked his approval and bounded out of the truck, racing toward the barn where he'd made so many discoveries. The dog's joy was infectious. Sophie chased after him, laughing. Liam followed at a slower pace, mindful of his heart but determined not to let it limit him. Connor stood in the clearing, watching his children play with their dog in the fading light. The war was over. The battle won, and tomorrow the real work of building a life would begin. But tonight, they would celebrate. They would honor Grace's memory, and they would rest in the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds and all obstacles, love actually was enough. The sun dipped below the mountain ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed Grace's dreams and now would watch over their fulfillment. Connor breathed deep, feeling the mountain air fill his lungs, and smiled. They were home. They were safe. They were together. And that finally was everything. The first night back at the ranch after the court victory felt different from all the nights before. Connor stood on the porch watching stars emerge over the mountain ridge while Sophie and Liam slept inside, their breathing steady and peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. Bear sat beside him, warm presence in the cold October air, tail thumping occasionally against the weathered boards. "We did it, boy," Connor whispered. "We actually did it." The dog leaned into his leg, and Connor let his hand rest on Bear's head, feeling the solid reality of fur and bone and loyalty that had carried them through the darkest days. The ranch house still sagged. The windows still needed replacing. The roof still leaked in 3 places. But none of that mattered the way it had before. This was theirs now, protected by law, secured by Grace's planning and their own willingness to fight. Connor pulled Grace's final letter from his pocket, the one Sophie had read in court. He'd read it a dozen times since, trying to absorb the depth of her love, her faith that he could do this. The paper was soft from handling, the ink slightly smudged where tears had fallen. "You proved me right," he said to the night, to Grace's memory, to whatever part of her still existed in the wind moving through the pines. "The kids are safe, the land is protected. Now comes the hard part, actually building something worthy of what you sacrificed." Morning came cold and bright. Connor woke the twins with pancakes made on the camp stove, coffee for himself, hot chocolate for them. They ate sitting on the porch steps, watching mist rise from the valley below as sunlight touched the highest peaks. "What do we do first?" Liam asked, syrup on his chin, looking at the broken house with determination instead of despair. Connor considered the question. "We make it livable. Winter's coming. We need heat, running water, safe stairs. The rest can wait." "I can paint," Sophie offered. "Once the walls are fixed, make it feel like home." Connor smiled at her. "Your mom would like that." Father Ben Crowley arrived mid-morning, driving his old pickup up the rutted road with a load of supplies in the bed. He climbed out wearing work clothes instead of clerical collar, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Thought you might need help," the priest said. "And I brought a proposal." They sat at the rickety kitchen table while Father Ben spread out papers, architectural sketches, financial projections. Legal documents establishing a nonprofit foundation. I've been thinking about Helen's will, Father Ben began. The requirement that this land serve community benefit. What if we built something specifically for veterans? A retreat center, place for men and women coming back from war to find their footing again. Connor stared at the sketches showing small cabins arranged around a central lodge, gardens and workshop spaces, a training facility for service dogs. It was ambitious, impossibly ambitious for a man with $40,000 in savings and a house held together by hope in rotting timber. This would cost millions, Connor said quietly. Helen's estate had $2 million in bonds, Father Ben replied. Grace never touched them. They're sitting in probate, but as executor of the trust, you can access those funds for purposes that align with the will's intentions. Veteran housing and rehabilitation absolutely qualifies. Connor looked at the sketches again, seeing not just buildings but possibility. Men like him, broken by war, finding a place to heal. Learning to work the land, training vice, rebuilding the internal structures that combat had shattered. It was exactly what Grace would have wanted, what her grandmother had envisioned when she wrote that will protecting the land from development. How long would it take to build? Connor asked. 8 months for initial phase, Father Ben said. 4 cabins, therapy barn, renovated main house. We'd need contractors, but I know people. Veterans who'd work for fair wages because they believe in the mission. Sophie leaned forward, eyes bright. Mom would love this, helping people like Dad. Liam nodded. Can we help build it, like actually work on it? Connor met Father Ben's eyes. The old priest was smiling, already knowing the answer. Let's do it, Connor said. Let's build what Grace dreamed. The next weeks blurred into constant motion. Kelly Brennan handled the legal framework, establishing Hayes Hope Ranch as a 501c3 nonprofit with Connor as executive director, and Father Ben, Kelly, and 2 local veterans as the board. The $2 million from Helen's estate transferred into the foundation account. Connor stared at that number on the bank statement, unable to quite process that they had resources to actually build something. Word spread through the valley. A veteran was turning the old Hayes Ranch into a recovery center. Contractors started showing up, offering discounted rates. The local hardware store donated materials. A lumber company provided wood at cost. It seemed like everyone in the county had someone who'd served, someone who'd struggled coming home, someone who needed what Connor was trying to build. Travis Reed appeared one morning, sober and determined, asking if there was work. Connor hired him on the spot as construction manager. Travis knew the trades, knew how to manage crews, and carried the particular intensity of someone trying to prove they deserved a second chance. The work was hard, brutal some days. They tore out rotted beams and replaced them with new timber. They rebuilt the foundation where moisture had compromised the stone. They framed new walls and ran electrical conduit and plumbing lines. The twins helped after school, Sophie painting trim boards, Liam organizing tools and fetching supplies. Bear appointed himself site supervisor, making rounds to check on every worker, accepting pets and treats, somehow knowing that his presence settled the veterans who'd come to help build. The dog had a gift for finding the men having hard moments and sitting beside them until the moment passed. 3 weeks into construction, Connor had his first major episode since before the court hearing. He was working on the roof, replacing shingles in the bright November sun, when a nail gun fired nearby. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and immediate, and Connor's mind wasn't on a Montana ranch anymore. He was in Kandahar, dust and heat and the distinctive snap of AK-47 fire. His buddy Martinez going down with blood spreading across his uniform. Connor trying to reach him while rounds kicked up dirt and the world narrowed to survival and screaming and the coppery taste of fear. Connor, someone was calling. Connor, you good? He couldn't answer. His hands had locked around the hammer he'd been holding. Knuckles white, whole body rigid with a tension that had nothing to do with the present moment. His breathing came fast and shallow, hyperventilating, vision tunneling. Bear's barking cut through the noise. The dog had climbed the ladder, something he'd never done before, and was pressing his full weight against Connor's legs. The warmth and solidity of the animal's body became an anchor. Connor's awareness slowly expanded. Not Kandahar, Montana, not under fire, safe. He managed to get down the ladder before his legs gave out. Sat hard in the dirt while his hands shook and his heart hammered, and shame burned through him that he'd lost control in front of the crew. Bear wouldn't leave his side, kept pushing against him, performing the deep pressure therapy that reset Connor's nervous system. It was Sophie who found him 20 minutes later, still sitting in the dirt, bare sprawled across his lap. She'd been in town with Liam getting paint and came back to find the construction crew giving her father space while looking worried. "Dad?" Her voice was small, scared. "Are you okay?" Connor tried to answer, but the words stuck. He'd promised himself he wouldn't let the kids see him like this. Promised he'd be strong enough to protect them from his brokenness. But here he was, shaking in the dirt, unable to even stand without help. Sophie knelt beside him and did something he didn't expect. She wrapped her arms around both him and Bear, holding on tight. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here." The words broke something open in Connor's chest. He buried his face against her shoulder and let himself cry, all the accumulated fear and pressure and exhaustion of the past months releasing in shaking sobs. Bear pressed closer, Sophie held tighter, and slowly the world came back into focus. When Connor could finally speak, his voice came out rough. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "I'm not," Sophie said firmly. She pulled back to look at him, and he saw grace in her eyes. The same strength, the same refusal to accept easy lies. "Mom said you have bad days, that you fight through them. I'd rather see you fight than pretend everything's fine when it's not." That night, after their crew had left and the twins were asleep, Connor sat with Father Ben on the porch. The priest had stayed late, helping organize materials for tomorrow's work, and now sat in comfortable silence while Connor struggled to put words to what he was feeling. "I nearly lost it today," Connor said finally. "In front of everyone. In front of Sophie." Father Ben nodded. "And you came back from it. That's what matters." "What if I can't do this?" Connor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What if I'm too broken to run a recovery center? How can I help other veterans heal when I can't even hear a nail gun without losing my mind?" The priest was quiet for a long moment. Then he told a story Connor had never heard, about his own time in Vietnam, about the ambush that killed half his platoon, about the 40 years of nightmares that followed. "I became a priest thinking I could pray the trauma away," Father Ben said. "Thought God would heal me if my faith was strong enough. But healing doesn't work like that. It's not about being fixed. It's about learning to carry your scars with grace." He turned to look at Connor. "You think the veterans who will come here need someone who's conquered PTSD? They need someone who understands that some wounds never fully close. That strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up again, and again, and again." Connor absorbed that, feeling truth in it, even if acceptance would take time. Bear stirred at his feet, and Connor scratched the dog's ears, grounding himself in that simple connection. Over the following weeks, the ranch transformed. The main house became structurally sound. 4 small cabins took shape near the barn, each designed for single occupancy with a bed, desk, and window overlooking the mountains. The therapy barn got rebuilt with workspace for woodworking, leathercraft, and other hands-on activities. Gardens were planned for spring planting. Travis Reed proved invaluable. He worked from dawn to dusk, his own recovery reinforced by the purpose of building something that would help others. He'd been 3 months sober now, attending meetings in town, slowly rebuilding trust with his ex-wife regarding their children. One afternoon, Travis found Connor in the barn and asked if they could talk. The younger man looked nervous, hands in his pockets, unable to meet Connor's eyes. "I got a call from my ex," Travis said. "She's willing to let me have supervised visits with my kids. First time in 2 years." Connor felt a surge of genuine joy. "Travis, that's incredible." "It's because of this place," Travis continued. "Because you gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. My lawyer told the judge about the work I'm doing here, how I've been reliable, how helping build this has helped me stay clean." "You did that yourself," Connor said. "I just gave you the opportunity. You chose to take it." Travis finally met his eyes. "I want you to know, if you ever need anything, I'm here. You saved my life, man. I won't forget that." After Travis left, Connor stood alone in the barn, thinking about what Father Ben had said, about carrying scars with grace, about getting up again. Maybe that was enough. Maybe helping others didn't require being healed yourself. Maybe it just required being willing to walk beside them while you all figured it out together. 4 months into construction, William Hartfield returned. Connor was working on cabin framing when Bear's bark changed tone. Not alarm exactly, but alert. A vehicle approaching. Connor looked up to see a gray sedan pulling into the clearing. Expensive but understated. Nothing like the black luxury SUV William usually traveled in. The driver's door opened and William climbed out. He looked older than he had in the courtroom. Thinner, the silver in his hair seemed to have spread, his face carrying new lines. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a work jacket, which was jarring enough that Connor just stared. "Connor," William called. "May I speak with you?" Connor climbed down from the cabin frame, wiping sawdust from his hands. Bear positioned himself between them but didn't growl. The dog's body language suggested wariness rather than threat. "Mr. Hartfield?" Connor said carefully. "What brings you here?" William looked around at the construction, taking in the cabins, the renovated house, the therapy barn rising from new timber. "What are you building?" "Veterans Retreat," Connor replied. "Place for people coming back from war to find their footing. What Grace's grandmother wanted the land used for." William nodded slowly. "May I see?" Connor hesitated, then gestured toward the site. They walked together in silence, Connor pointing out different structures, explaining the layout and purpose. William listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When they'd completed the circuit, William stopped near the main house. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. "To you, and to Sophie and Liam, if they'll see me." Connor studied the older man's face, looking for manipulation, for angles. But all he saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Why now?" Connor asked. "Because I went to Grace's grave," William said. "First time since the funeral. I stood there for 3 hours trying to find something to say to her. Some way to justify what I'd done. And I couldn't." He turned to face Connor directly. "My daughter spent her whole life trying to please me, and I never once told her she'd succeeded. Because I kept moving the bar, kept demanding more, and she died thinking I was ashamed of her." "Were you?" Connor kept his voice neutral. William's face crumpled slightly. "No, God help me, no. I was terrified of her. Terrified that she was brave enough to choose happiness over success. That she understood something I'd spent my whole life running from. Which is, that love matters more than legacy," William said. "That being known matters more than being important. She tried to teach me that, and I was too proud to learn." Connor didn't respond immediately. Bear had moved closer to William, sniffing cautiously, reading the man's emotional state with canine precision. When the dog sat down without hostility, Connor took it as a good sign. "What do you want from me?" Connor asked. "Nothing," William said. "Or no." "That's not true. I want to ask if I can see Sophie and Liam." "The supervised visits," the judge ordered. "I know I have no right to ask for more, but I'd like to try. To be what they need instead of what I think they should want." Connor considered. The twins were at school, wouldn't be home for 2 hours. He made a decision. "Come back Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. We'll have lunch here. You can spend time with them, see the place. But William, if you come to control or judge or manipulate, you leave immediately. Clear?" "Clear," William said. "Thank you." He started toward his car, then stopped. "One more thing. The Apex oil deal fell through when the fraud came to light. They sued me for breach of contract. Settlement was $50 million. Connor waited, unsure where this was going. "I'd like to donate $5 million to the foundation," William continued. "For construction, for programming, whatever you need to make this vision real." Connor's first instinct was to refuse. Pride demanded it. But he thought about what the money could do. More cabins, professional staff, therapy programs, medical care, everything needed to actually help veterans instead of just housing them. "That's between you and the board," Connor said finally. "I can't make that decision alone." "I understand," William said. "I'll contact Father Ben about proper channels." He climbed into his car and drove away, leaving Connor standing in the clearing with more questions than answers. Bear whined softly and Connor knelt to scratch the dog's ears. "What do you think, boy? Can people really change?" Bear licked his hand, which Connor chose to interpret as cautious optimism. Sunday came cold and overcast, threat of snow in the heavy clouds. Connor had told the twins about William's visit, letting them decide whether to participate. They discussed it between themselves, then approached Connor together with their answer. "We'll try," Sophie said. "But Dad, you have to be there the whole time." "I'm not going anywhere," Connor promised. William arrived exactly at 2, carrying a bag that turned out to contain homemade bread and what he claimed was his late mother's apple pie recipe. The gesture was so unexpected, so humble, that Connor didn't know how to respond. They ate lunch at the newly repaired kitchen table, conversation stilted but genuine. William asked about school, about friends, about what Sophie was drawing these days. He listened to Liam explain his interest in service dog training without interrupting or suggesting the boy should aim for something more prestigious. After lunch, the twins showed William around the property. Connor followed at a distance, giving them space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Bear walked between the kids and William, neutral observer in dog form. "This cabin is where the first veteran will stay," Liam explained, showing William inside the completed structure. "It's small, but it has everything someone needs. Bed, desk, heat, quiet." "Did you help build it?" William asked. "Yeah, me and Sophie both. Dad taught us how to measure and cut, how to make sure everything's square and level." William ran his hand along the smooth pine wall. "It's beautiful work." Sophie showed him her mural in the therapy barn, a landscape of the mountains at sunrise with text from a Mary Oliver poem. William stood looking at it for a long time. "Your mother loved Mary Oliver," he said finally. "Used to read her poems to me when she was young, before I convinced her that poetry wasn't practical." "You convinced her wrong," Sophie said, not unkindly. "Poetry kept her going when things were hard." William nodded, accepting the correction. "I was wrong about a lot of things." As the afternoon wore on, something shifted. The tension eased. Liam showed William his notebook where he tracked Bear's training exercises and behavioral observations. Sophie shared her sketchbook, including drawings of Grace from memory. William looked at each image with careful attention, tears gathering in his eyes when he saw his daughter's face rendered in graphite with such love. When it was time for William to leave, he stood on the porch, seeming reluctant to go. "Thank you for today," he said, "for letting me try. Come back next Sunday if you want," Connor offered. "Same time." "I'd like that," William said. Then hesitantly he looked at Sophie and Liam. "Would it be all right if I hugged you?" The twins exchanged glances. Then Sophie stepped forward and let William embrace her briefly. Liam followed, awkward but willing. William's face crumpled with emotion he didn't try to hide. After William left, Connor sat with the twins on the porch steps. "How do you feel about that?" "Weird," Sophie said. "But okay, weird? Like maybe he's actually trying." "He seems lonely," Liam observed. "Like he doesn't know how to be a person anymore, just a businessman." Connor nodded. "That's probably accurate. Your mom tried to teach him how to just be human. Maybe he's finally ready to learn." Over the next months, William became a regular presence. Not intrusive, not controlling. He came for Sunday lunches. He helped with small tasks, never pretending expertise he didn't have, but willing to follow instructions. He brought supplies when asked. He listened more than he talked. The $5 million donation came through proper legal channels, vetted by the board, restricted to specific uses that align with the foundation's mission. The money allowed them to expand plans. 6 additional cabins, a full medical clinic, therapy staff salaries, service dog training program with professional handlers. By late April, the ranch was ready. 10 cabins, renovated main house, therapy barn, medical clinic, gardens planted and beginning to green. A sign at the entrance that Sophie had painted read Hayes Hope Ranch with the tagline, "Loyalty saves lives," beneath it. The first 6 residents arrived on a Tuesday morning. Connor met them as they climbed out of vans that had transported them from VA hospitals and transitional housing programs. A Marine with traumatic brain injury who couldn't hold down jobs. A female Army veteran dealing with military sexual trauma. A Navy corpsman whose survivor guilt had nearly destroyed him. A 58-year-old Vietnam vet who'd been homeless for 15 years. 2 younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan carrying invisible wounds that showed only in their eyes. Connor welcomed each one, showed them to their cabins, explained the program. No mandatory activities, no rigid schedule, just space to breathe, work the land, train dogs if interested, attend therapy if needed. A place to remember they were more than their trauma. That first night, Connor addressed them all in the therapy barn. Bear sat beside him, calm presence that the veterans immediately gravitated toward. "I'm Connor Hayes," he began. "I'm a combat veteran. I have PTSD. Some days I'm okay. Some days I can't get it out of bed. Some days I hear a loud noise and I'm back in Afghanistan convinced I'm about to die." He paused, meeting each person's eyes. "This place isn't about fixing you. It's about giving you space to figure out who you are beyond war. To learn that broken doesn't mean worthless. That struggling doesn't mean failing." A hand went up. The Vietnam vet, Carl, his face weathered and skeptical. "What makes you think you can help us when you can't even help yourself?" "Fair question," Connor said. "I can't, not alone, but maybe we can help each other. That's the theory anyway. We'll find out together if it works." Over the following weeks, The ranch found its rhythm. Residents worked the gardens, learning patience through planting and tending. They trained rescue dogs paired from local shelters, teaching commands while learning their own capacity for gentleness. They gathered for meals in the main house, conversation tentative at first, but gradually opening into real connection. Connor ran group therapy sessions twice a week, guided by a professional therapist, but grounded in shared experience. He made himself vulnerable, talking about his struggles, his failures, the days he wanted to quit. The openness gave others permission to be honest too. Rita, the female Army veteran, spoke for the first time in the third week about the assault, about the betrayal of men she trusted, about the shame that had nearly killed her. When she finished shaking and crying, every person in the circle stood and surrounded her, not touching, just present, bearing witness, saying without words that she wasn't alone anymore. James, the Navy corpsman, found healing through working with a German shepherd named Scout. The dog had been rescued from a neglectful situation, fearful and defensive. James spent hours earning the dog's trust, and in the process learned to trust himself again. Carl, the Vietnam vet, was the hardest case. He'd been on the street so long he'd forgotten how to live inside. The first week he slept on the floor because the bed felt wrong. He hoarded food in his cabin. He startled at every sound. But slowly, with patience and no pressure, Carl began to soften. He started helping in the gardens, his weathered hands gentle with seedlings. He began joining mealtimes. And one night, 6 weeks in, he stood at group and said 5 words that broke everyone's heart and gave everyone hope. "I haven't had family since Vietnam." His voice shook. Until now. Travis Reed, now 6 months sober and promoted to operations manager, helped coordinate the work programs and maintenance schedules. He'd regained partial custody of his kids and brought them to visit the ranch, showing them what their dad was building. The pride in his voice when he introduced them to Connor was audible. Memorial Day came with clear skies and mountain wildflowers blooming across the meadows. The ranch held its dedication ceremony, a formal opening attended by VA officials, state representatives, veterans organizations, and community members who'd supported the project. Connor stood before the crowd, Sophie and Liam on one side, Father Ben on the other, bare at his feet. Behind him, a bronze statue was covered by a tarp. Sophie had designed it. A local artist had cast it. William had paid for it without being asked, his contribution to honoring the daughter he'd failed to understand in life. "This ranch exists because of one woman's courage," Connor began. "Grace Hayes believed that broken things could be made beautiful. That freedom mattered more than fortune. That healing was possible for anyone brave enough to try." He pulled the tarp away, revealing the statue. Grace stood with one hand extended, offering help. Beside her, Bear sat at attention, guardian and guide. The inscription read, "Grace Hayes, 1985 to 2024. She saw the wounded and made them whole." The crowd applauded. Connor saw tears on many faces. Rita was crying openly. Carl stood at attention, hand over his heart. The other residents formed a line behind them, honoring a woman they'd never met but who'd changed their lives by believing people deserve second chances. William stood at the edge of the crowd, face drawn with emotion. When the ceremony ended and people began moving toward the reception, he approached Connor. "That's beautiful," he said, voice thick. "Thank you for honoring her like this." Connor nodded. "She deserves to be remembered for what she built, even if she didn't live to see it finished." William looked at the statue, at Grace's bronze face forever captured in an expression of compassion. "I wish I'd told her I was proud of her. Just once. Just so she knew." "Tell her now," Connor said quietly. "She can hear you." William moved to stand before the statue. He was quiet for a long moment. Then so softly Connor almost missed it, he spoke. "I'm proud of you, Gracie. I'm sorry it took losing you to understand what you were trying to teach me. But I'm learning now. I promise I'm learning." He placed a hand on the bronze figure, then walked away into the crowd, shoulders shaking. Sophie appeared beside Connor. "He's really trying, isn't he?" she said. "Yeah," Connor agreed. "He really is." The reception continued into evening. Veterans and civilians mingling, sharing stories, finding common ground. Liam demonstrated dog training techniques with Bear, the crowd laughing and applauding as Bear performed complex commands flawlessly. Sophie showed her murals in the therapy barn, explaining the symbolism behind each image. Kelly Brennan found Connor as the sun was setting. "You did it," she said. "Everything Grace hoped for and more." "We did it," Connor corrected. "None of this happens without you fighting for us in court." Kelly smiled. I'm just glad I was there to help. James would have loved this place, would have needed it. Connor understood she was talking about her late husband, the Marine whose death had driven her to fight for veterans in family court. Maybe we name the medical clinic after him, the James Brennan Wellness Center. Kelly's eyes filled. He'd be honored. As night fell and the crowd thinned, Connor found himself standing with his children and Bear beside Grace's statue. The bronze caught the last light, making Grace seem almost alive. "We did it, Mom," Sophie whispered. "We built your dream," Liam added. "And we're going to keep building it, help more people, save more lives." Connor placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Bear pressed against all of them. Grace's legacy wasn't just the land or the buildings or even the veterans finding healing. It was this: a family that chose love over comfort, that fought for what mattered, that turned grief into purpose. The stars emerged, bright and countless over the Montana mountains. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The ranch settled into evening quiet, lights glowing from cabin windows, where men and women who'd lost themselves in war were slowly finding their way home. Connor breathed deep, feeling peace that had eluded him since Grace's death. The work wasn't finished, would never be finished. There would always be more veterans needing help, more battles to fight against bureaucracy and stigma, and the thousand ways society failed those who'd served. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough. They'd honored Grace. They'd protected the land. They'd built something that would outlast them all. Bear barked once, soft and content. Connor smiled. "Yeah, boy, we did good." And in the morning, they'd do it all again. Spring returned to the Montana mountains with the gentle insistence of wildflowers pushing through late snow, painting the meadows around Hayes Hope Ranch in colors that seemed too vibrant to be real. Purple lupine and yellow balsam root covered the hillsides where a year ago there had been only construction equipment and mud. The ranch itself had transformed from rough framework into a functioning community, cabins weathered just enough to look like they belonged to the landscape rather than imposed upon it. Connor stood on the porch of the main house, coffee steaming in the morning chill, watching the valley wake up. Lights flickered on the 16 cabins now scattered across the property. Smoke rose from chimneys. Someone was already working in the garden, preparing soil for spring planting. The therapy barn doors stood open, revealing the workshop spaces where veterans would spend their day crafting furniture or working leather, or simply sitting with the silence that outdoor work required. 40 residents now called this place home, at least temporarily. Some had been here since opening day. Others had arrived in recent months, referred by VA hospitals or veterans organizations that had heard about the ranch through word of mouth and the occasional news story. 15 staff members helped run programs, maintain facilities, provide medical care and therapeutic support. It had grown beyond anything Connor imagined that first night when Father Ben spread architectural sketches across a rickety table. Bear emerged from the house and moved to stand beside Connor, the dog's gait slower than it used to be, joints stiff from age and the degenerative condition that had started showing symptoms 6 months ago. The German Shepherd was 10 and a half now, his muzzle gone gray, his movements careful in ways that spoke of pain, managed but not eliminated. "Morning, old friend," Connor murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. Bear leaned into the touch, tail wagging with effort, eyes still bright with the intelligence and loyalty that had carried them both through so much. The sound of an engine drew Connor's attention. A van pulled up the access road, transporting new arrivals from the Missoula Farm Hospital. 3 veterans climbed out, looking uncertain and exhausted in the way people did when they'd been fighting alone for too long. Connor descended the steps to greet them, Bear moving alongside despite the visible discomfort each step cost him. "Welcome to Hayes Hope Ranch," Connor said, extending his hand to each person. "I'm Connor. This is Bear. We're glad you're here." Over breakfast in the dining hall, Connor watched the community that had formed. Carl, the Vietnam veteran who'd been homeless for 15 years, now worked as head groundskeeper and had just celebrated his 1-year anniversary of being housed. His son had visited last month, the first contact in 22 years. A reconciliation built slowly through phone calls and letters before the young man finally drove up from Colorado to see his father face to face. Rita, the Army veteran dealing with military sexual trauma, sat with her teenage daughter who'd started visiting regularly after years of estrangement. The girl helped in the art therapy program Sophie had developed, finding her own healing through teaching other kids how to process grief and trauma through creative expression. James, the Navy corpsman whose survivor guilt had nearly destroyed him, was enrolled in online nursing school while living at the ranch. He planned to open a veterinary medical clinic on site, expanding the services they could offer. The rescue dog he'd bonded with, Scout, sat at his feet, the animal's transformation from fearful rescue to confident therapy dog, mirroring James's own journey. Travis Reed moved between tables, checking in with residents, coordinating the day's work assignments. 18 months sober now, promoted to ranch operations director, he'd regained partial custody of his children and brought them to visit every other weekend. The pride in his face when he introduced them around was the kind that came from earning back what you'd lost through your own poor choices. Connor's attention was drawn to a young Marine sitting alone near the window. Tyler, 24, had arrived 2 weeks ago after his third suicide attempt landed him in psychiatric care. He'd been at the ranch for 14 days and had barely spoken 10 words. Just sat in his cabin or walked the property alone, unreachable behind walls Connor recognized because he'd built similar ones himself. After breakfast, Connor found Sophie in the art therapy barn, setting up supplies for the morning session. At 14, she'd grown into a quiet confidence that reminded Connor of Grace. She ran programs for both residents and their children, teaching them to express what words couldn't capture. "How's Tyler doing?" Connor asked. Sophie glanced toward the window where the young Marine could be seen walking toward the woods. "Not good. He won't talk, won't draw, just walks." "Give him time," Connor said. The worry settled in his chest. He'd seen that particular withdrawal before, recognized the signs of someone deciding whether to stay or go in a permanent way. Bear had been watching Tyler too, Connor realized. The dog's attention tracked the young man with the focused intensity of someone performing a mission. When Tyler disappeared into the tree line, Bear moved toward the door, whining with urgency. Later that afternoon, Tyler didn't show up for lunch. Connor organized a search, veterans fanning out across the property, calling the young man's name. Bear, despite obvious pain in his hips, insisted on participating, nose to the ground, pulling toward the high ridge overlooking the valley. They found Tyler at the cliff edge 2 miles from the main house. He stood with his back to them, a pistol hanging loose in his right hand, staring down at the rocks 400 feet below. Bear had reached him first somehow, the old dog positioning himself between Tyler and the edge, refusing to move. "Tyler?" Connor called softly, not approaching. "Talk to me." The Marine didn't turn. "Can't do this anymore. The nightmares, the guilt, I'm tired of fighting." "I know," Connor said. "I've stood where you are. Different cliff, same choice. Then you know there's no way out." "There's always a way out, just not that one." Connor took a slow step closer. Bear's still here, old, hurting, barely able to walk. But he followed you 2 miles because he knows you matter. Because he won't give up on you, even if you've given up on yourself. Tyler's shoulders shook. "I killed civilians, kids. It was supposed to be a terrorist safe house, but we had bad intel and I kicked in that door and there were children and I—" His voice broke. Connor closed the remaining distance, slowly, hands visible. "War puts us in impossible situations," Connor said quietly. "Makes us do things that haunt us. But dying doesn't undo what happened. It just makes sure you never get the chance to become someone who uses that pain to help others avoid the same mistakes." Tyler looked at Bear, still planted between him and the edge despite trembling legs. Why does he care? Because that's what he does. Connor knelt beside the dog, one hand on Bear's head. "He saved my life more times than I can count. Not from enemy fire, from myself, from the voice that says you're too broken to matter." Tyler slowly lowered the pistol. His face crumpled. "I don't know how to live with what I did." "None of us do," Connor said. "We just figure it out one day at a time. With help, with people who understand." He extended his hand. "Stay one more day. Tomorrow you can still make any choice you want, but give us one more day." Tyler stared at Connor's hand, then at Bear, then back. Finally, he placed the pistol on the ground and let Connor pull him into an embrace. The young Marine sobbed against Connor's shoulder, while Bear pressed against both of them, and the search party approached slowly, giving them space. That night, Tyler joined group therapy for the first time. Spoke 3 sentences about Fallujah and children and guilt that would never fully fade. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Connor assigned Tyler to help care for Bear, giving the young man a purpose that required showing up every day. Medication at specific times, gentle exercise to keep the dog's joints mobile, massage therapy for pain management. Tyler approached the work with the seriousness of someone who understood he was saving a life, by helping another creature simply exist with dignity through suffering. The bond between them formed quickly. Bear seemed to know Tyler needed him, would rest his head in the young man's lap during rough moments, would wake him from nightmares with a cold nose and patient eyes. Within weeks, Tyler was talking more, engaging with other residents, finding purpose in the smallest tasks. Meanwhile, William Hartfield had become a fixture at the ranch in ways that still surprised Connor. The man who tried to destroy their family now showed up every Sunday for dinner, arriving in work clothes instead of business suits, bringing groceries or supplies, asking how he could help rather than directing others. His relationship with Sophie and Liam had evolved from tentative to genuine. They had real conversations now. William listened when they talked about school, about friends, about their struggles and hopes. He didn't try to fix everything or offer unsolicited advice. He just showed up, consistently, proving through repetition that he meant what he'd said about learning to be what they needed. One evening in late summer, William approached Connor with a proposal. The ranch medical clinic needed expansion. More exam rooms, better equipment, a full-time doctor instead of rotating volunteers. William wanted to fund it completely, $5 million with one condition. Name it after Grace, he said, the Grace Hayes Memorial Medical Clinic. Let her be remembered for healing instead of for what I did to her. Connor considered, then nodded. She'd like that, helping veterans get the care they deserve. William's eyes grew wet. Thank you for letting me be part of this, for giving me a chance to honor her properly. Over the following months, William did something even more unexpected. He began what Sophie started calling his apology tour, tracking down people he had hurt during his decades of ruthless business practices. 12 families he had foreclosed on received checks covering their losses plus interest. Union organizers he had blacklisted got public acknowledgement of the wrongs done to them. Town officials he'd corrupted heard his confession and resignation from every board and committee. The local newspaper ran a profile titled Hartfield Atones, documenting the billionaire's systematic attempt at restitution. Connor read it one morning over coffee, Bear resting at his feet in the wheelchair cart Connor had built when the dog could no longer walk unassisted. You think he means it? Travis asked, reading over Connor's shoulder. Or is this just good publicity? Connor watched through the window as William helped Liam train a new rescue dog, the older man following the teenager's instructions without ego or impatience. 6 months ago, I would have said publicity. Now I think he's genuinely trying to become someone his daughter could be proud of. Bear made a soft sound, somewhere between agreement and resignation. The dog spent most of his time in the cart now, wheels supporting his paralyzed hindquarters while he still managed to work. Veterans would wheel him to therapy sessions. Children would visit and pet him gently. He attended every meal, every gathering, still serving even as his body failed. The vet had delivered the prognosis weeks ago. Degenerative myelopathy, progressive and incurable. Bear would continue losing function until breathing became difficult. 6 months, maybe less. The kindest thing would be to let him go before the pain became unmanageable. Connor knew it was coming, knew he was being selfish keeping Bear alive when the dog had given everything and deserved rest. But the thought of losing him felt like losing Grace all over again. Bear had been there through every dark moment, had guided them to the discoveries that saved their family, had taught Connor that loyalty wasn't weakness and dependence wasn't failure. One October morning, Bear wouldn't eat, couldn't lift his head without obvious effort. His breathing came labored and the light in his eyes had dimmed in a way that spoke of more than physical pain. Connor called the vet, then gathered Sophie and Liam. They sat together in the living room while Bear lay on his favorite blanket, the twins stroking his fur with gentle hands. It's time, Connor said, voice breaking. He's ready. Is it okay if we say goodbye here, at home? Sophie nodded, tears already falling. Liam pressed his face against Bear's neck, shoulders shaking. The afternoon was warm for October, Indian summer giving them one last gift of golden light and gentle breeze. Connor carried Bear outside and placed him on his blanket under the cottonwood tree where they'd spent countless evenings. The entire ranch community gathered without being summoned, 40 residents and 15 staff forming a circle around the dying dog. Rita brought flowers from the garden. Carl stood at attention, hand over his heart. James held Scout, the rescue dog Bear had helped train. Tyler knelt beside Bear and whispered thank you over and over. Sophie had written a letter. She read it aloud, voice shaking but clear. Dear Bear, you protected Dad when he couldn't protect himself. You found Mom's treasures when we needed them most. You taught us that love is more than words. You saved Tyler's life and probably a dozen others we don't even know about. You're the best dog who ever lived. We'll never forget you. Liam spoke next, one hand resting on Bear's chest. Tell Mom we're okay. Tell her the ranch is beautiful. Tell her Dad is healing and so are we. You did everything she asked. You can rest now. Connor waited until the twins finished, then placed both hands on Bear's head, looking into eyes that had seen him through war and grief and rebuilding. You were my brother in arms, he said softly. My son's teacher. My daughter's guardian. Grace sent you to save us, and you did. Mission accomplished, soldier. Stand down. We'll take it from here. The vet knelt beside them and administered the injection with practiced gentleness. Bear's eyes stayed on Connor, steady and trusting, as his breathing slowed. Connor felt the heartbeat under his hand grow fainter. One breath, another, then stillness. Carl stepped forward and played taps on a battered trumpet, the notes carrying across the valley in the golden light. Every veteran saluted. The children placed flowers on Bear's still form. Sophie and Liam clung to Connor while he held them and let his own tears fall without shame. They buried Bear on the hilltop overlooking the ranch the next morning, full military honors, a flag folded and presented to Connor. 21-gun salute echoing off the mountains, a headstone of polished granite reading Bear. Military working dog, loyalty saves lives, 2015 to 2025. Each person placed a stone on the grave, an old tradition Connor had learned from Father Ben. The pile grew into a small cairn, 43 stones representing every life Bear had touched. William placed his stone last, kneeling stiffly to set it with care. Thank you for protecting my family when I failed them, William said to the grave. Rest well, good dog. The days after Bear's death felt hollow. Connor woke expecting to hear the click of claws on hardwood, the warm weight settling against his legs. The wheelchair cart sat empty in the corner. The food bowl remained full, but the ranch continued. Veterans still needed help. Programs still ran. The work Bear had been part of didn't stop just because he was gone. And slowly, Connor understood that was the point. They'd built something larger than any one person or dog, something that would continue. 6 months passed, winter came and went. Spring returned again, bringing with it expansion news. Hayes Hope Ranch had inspired 8 satellite locations across the country, each following the model Connor and Father Ben had developed. Sophie's art therapy program had been adopted by 12 VA hospitals. Liam had written a training manual for service dog handlers working with combat veterans that was being used by programs nationwide. Connor traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak at a national veterans conference, sharing what they'd learned about peer support in land-based therapy and the healing power of honest community. He was uncomfortable with the attention, preferred the quiet work of running groups and maintaining the ranch, but understood that spreading the message mattered. On a May afternoon, Liam arrived home from school with a cardboard box. Inside, a German shepherd puppy, 8 weeks old, all paws and ears and boundless energy. Dad, meet Scout, Liam said, holding up the wriggling pup. I know it's soon, but the rescue had a litter and this one reminded me of Bear, and I thought. Connor started to object. He wasn't ready. The grief was still too fresh. But the puppy squirmed free and bounded straight to a new resident, a young woman dealing with severe anxiety, and immediately began the kind of instinctive comfort work that couldn't be taught. He's got Bear's spirit, Sophie observed, watching the puppy lean against the woman's legs until her breathing slowed. Connor knelt and let the puppy lick his face, feeling something ease in his chest. Yeah, he agreed, I think he does. On what would have been Grace's 41st birthday, they gathered at her grave beside Bear's. Annual tradition now, this pilgrimage to the hilltop to report on the year's progress. Sophie brought flowers. Liam brought a framed photo of the ranch from above, showing all 16 cabins, the expanded therapy barn, the new medical clinic. We served 200 veterans this year, Connor said to the headstone. 89% successful reintegration rate, 500 therapy dogs trained and placed. The model is spreading. You'd be proud of what we've built in your name. William stood apart from the family group, respectful of their space, but Liam waved him over. You're part of this too, Grandpa. The words still seemed to startle William, as if he hadn't earned the title despite a year and a half of showing up consistently. He approached slowly and stood before Grace's grave, silent for a long moment. May I say something, he asked. Connor nodded. Gracie, I'm so sorry I never listened to your dreams. William's voice cracked. I spent your whole life trying to make you into what I thought you should be instead of loving who you were. But your husband did what I couldn't. He heard you. He honored you. He built your vision. He paused, gathering himself. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to deserve remembrance, trying to become the grandfather you hoped I could be. Thank you for Sophie and Liam. Thank you for this chance. Sophie hugged William, the gesture spontaneous and genuine. Mom would be happy you're trying. Later that evening, Connor was cleaning Grace's old bedroom, preparing to convert it into office space for the ranch administrator they'd hired, when he found one final hidden note. It had slipped behind a loose board in the closet, yellowed paper in Grace's handwriting. The ranch isn't just land, she'd written. It's proof that broken things become beautiful when you give them room to heal, and people who believe in them. You proved that in war. Now you've proved it in peace. I love you, always. G. Connor sat on the floor and read it 3 times, laughing and crying in equal measure. She'd hidden breadcrumbs everywhere, messages timed to find him exactly when he needed them most. He folded the note carefully and placed it in his wallet beside the first letter she'd written, the one that had warned him what was coming and given him weapons to fight. 5 years passed. The ranch expanded to 65 permanent residents, with the capacity for 20 more in transitional housing. 2,000 veterans had been served, 92% successful outcomes. The satellite locations numbered 18 now, spreading across the country. The model had been studied by universities, featured in documentaries, presented to Congress as evidence that peer support in land-based therapy worked when traditional approaches failed. Sophie, at 19, was pre-med at the University of Montana, specializing in trauma psychology, with plans to return to the ranch as clinical director. She still ran art therapy programs during summers and winters, her murals covering the walls of every building on the property. Liam, also 19, had joined the Army Veterinary Corps, following Connor's path of service but finding his own expression of it. He trained military working dogs and their handlers, teaching the next generation what Bear had taught him about the bond between soldier and dog. Connor, at 56, directed a network of ranches that had helped thousands find their way back from war. His hair had gone gray. The tremor in his hands had eased with time and therapy. The nightmares came less frequently. He'd learned to carry his scars with something approaching grace. William, at 76, split his time between the ranch and philanthropic work, using his fortune to undo decades of damage. He'd funded veteran programs across Montana, established scholarships for children of fallen soldiers, endowed chairs in trauma research at 3 universities. And every Sunday, without fail, he had dinner with his grandchildren. On a summer evening, Connor walked the hilltop trail with Scout, the German Shepherd, now 5 years old and fully trained as a therapy dog. A new puppy, a female they'd named Liberty, bounded ahead chasing butterflies. Connor stopped at Bear's grave, now covered in wildflowers that seeded themselves each year. The cairn of stones had grown as residents added to it, a monument of gratitude from people the dog had never met, but whose lives he'd changed by making this place possible. "We did good, didn't we, Bear?" Connor said to the evening air, to the memory, to whatever part of his old friends still existed in the wind and the mountains and the legacy they'd built together. Scout barked once, sharp and certain. Connor smiled. "Yeah, boy, we did real good." He looked down the hill at the ranch spread across the valley. Lights glowing in cabin windows, smoke rising from the dining hall chimney, gardens lush with summer vegetables. Veterans and staff moving between buildings, going about the work of healing and helping and building lives from the wreckage of war. The physical structures would eventually age and need replacing. The people would come and go, but the idea, the belief that broken things could be made beautiful through love and patience and honest community that would endure. Grace had planted it, Connor had nurtured it, and now it grew beyond anything they'd imagined, spreading seeds of hope across the country. Liberty bounded back and pressed against Connor's leg, puppy energy barely contained. Scout sat at attention, dignified and patient, waiting for Connor to finish his conversation with ghosts. "Time to head back," Connor said. "They've got new arrivals coming tomorrow, 3 veterans from the hospital. They'll need welcoming." The walk down the hill as the sun set painted the sky in shades of orange and purple felt like completion. Not ending, but fulfillment. The work would continue. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in this moment, Connor allowed himself to feel what he'd been too afraid to feel for so long. Peace, not the absence of struggle, not the elimination of pain, but the deep settled knowledge that his life had meaning, that Grace's sacrifice had borne fruit, that the children they'd raised together were strong and good and would carry forward everything worth preserving. The ranch buildings glowed warm against the darkening mountains. Connor could hear laughter from the dining hall, someone playing guitar on a cabin porch, the sounds of a community that had become family through shared understanding and mutual support. He stopped at the entrance, looking up at the sign Sophie had painted 5 years ago. Hayes Hope Ranch, loyalty saves lives. Simple words, true words, words that had been tested and proven across thousands of lives touched by this place. Connor's phone buzzed, a text from Kelly Brennan, now on the national board overseeing all the ranch locations. Congratulations, President just announced you're receiving the Medal of Freedom. Ceremony next month, you earned this. Connor stared at the message, feeling overwhelmed. He'd just been trying to honor Grace, just trying to give veterans what he'd needed when he came home broken. The recognition felt unearned somehow, like credit for breathing or loving his children. But he understood that accepting it meant the work would gain more visibility, more support, more resources to help more people. So he'd go to Washington, he'd accept the medal, he'd give the speech they'd ask him to give, and then he'd come home and get back to the real work of showing up every day for people who needed someone to believe in them. Scout pressed against his leg, grounding him. Liberty had found a stick and was prancing proudly with her prize. The evening star appeared over the ridge, bright and constant. Connor breathed deep, mountain air filling his lungs, and walked toward the dining hall, toward the veterans waiting inside, toward the life he and Grace had built from grief and determination and the stubborn refusal to let trauma have the final word. Inside, 40 people looked up as he entered. Tyler, now operations manager, 2 years sober and engaged to a woman he'd met in town. Carl, whose son now visited monthly and was teaching his own children about the grandfather they'd never known. Rita, reconciled with her daughter and working as a counselor for other survivors. James, running the medical clinic and helping residents navigate VA benefits. And at a corner table, William Hartfield eating with Sophie and Liam, listening to his grandson talk about military working dog training with the kind of attention he'd never given Grace, but had learned to offer the next generation. Connor took his seat, Scout settling at his feet, Liberty still carrying her stick. Someone brought food. Conversation flowed around him, easy and real, the sound of people who'd found belonging after years of isolation. This, Connor thought, this is what Grace saw. This moment, this gathering. This proof that love builds while hate destroys. That community heals while isolation kills. That loyalty, the kind Bear embodied and Grace believed in, and Connor had tried to honor, really does save lives. After dinner, Connor stood to make an announcement. We've been approved for our 20th satellite location. Wyoming this time, opening next spring. We'll need experienced residents willing to help establish the program. Train new staff, show newcomers how this works. Hands went up immediately. Veterans who'd arrived broken and were now ready to help others through the same journey. The cycle continuing, the legacy spreading. Outside, the stars emerged in their countless thousands. Bear's grave on the hilltop caught the last light. Grace's statue near the therapy barn gleamed in the glow from cabin windows. And somewhere in the mountains, coyotes called to each other. Wild voices in the darkness that somehow made the lighted buildings feel even more like sanctuary. Connor walked the property one last time before bed, Scout beside him, checking that all was well. The garden gate latched properly, the generator humming steadily, cabin lights dimming as residents settled in for the night. The flag at half-mast in honor of a veteran who'd passed that week at age 92, peaceful in his sleep, surrounded by the community he'd found after Vietnam. At the entrance to the property, Connor paused before the memorial wall they'd built. Bronze plaques bearing names of every veteran who'd found help here. Hundreds of names, thousands more to come as the network expanded. Each one a life changed, a family preserved, a future salvaged from the wreckage of war. He added the newest name with reverent care, honoring the 92-year-old who'd finally found peace. Then he placed his hand on the wall and spoke quietly. Thank you for trusting us, for letting us walk beside you, for teaching us that healing isn't linear and courage isn't the absence of fear. You're part of this legacy now, part of what we've built, part of what we'll carry forward. Scout whined softly, ready to head inside. Connor scratched the dog's ears and smiled. Okay, boy, let's go home. They walked toward the main house, warm light spilling from windows. the mountains standing eternal watch, the stars bearing witness to a promise kept and a dream fulfilled. Grace Hayes had died believing that broken things could be made beautiful. Connor Hayes had spent 5 years proving her right. The ranch would continue long after he was gone, helped by children who'd learned that love was stronger than trauma, and by veterans who'd discovered that their scars told stories worth sharing. The legacy lived, not in buildings or programs or national recognition, but in lives changed, in families preserved, in the simple truth that showing up matters, that belief transforms, that loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that stays through darkness and doubt and desperate days, really does save lives. Connor closed the door behind him and stood in the quiet house, feeling the weight of exhaustion and the lightness of purpose in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more veterans in crisis, more administrative hurdles, more moments when he'd doubt whether any of this made a difference. But tonight he knew, deep in his bones, in the place where certainty lives beyond proof or evidence, they'd built something that mattered, something worthy of Grace's sacrifice and Bear's devotion, and the trust every veteran placed in them when they arrived broken and hoping. Connor climbed the stairs to his room, Scout following, Liberty curled in her bed near the fireplace. He pulled out Grace's letters, the ones he read when he needed to hear her voice, when the weight felt too heavy, when doubt crept in. The last line of the first letter, the one that had started everything, caught his eye. "You are not broken. You saved lives in war. Now save our children." He'd done that, saved Sophie and Liam from William's control. But he'd also saved so much more. Saved Tyler from the cliff, saved Carl from dying alone under a bridge, saved Rita from the isolation of untreated trauma, saved Travis from the spiral of addiction and despair. Grace had been right about everything. Trust Bear, trust yourself, trust that love was enough. Connor placed the letter carefully in its box and turned off the light. Scout settled on the floor beside the bed, breathing steady and calm. Outside, the ranch slept under stars that had watched over this valley long before humans arrived, and would continue watching long after they were gone. But in this moment, in this time, Hayes Hope Ranch stood as testament to the best of what humans could build when they chose love over fear, community over isolation, healing over revenge. Connor closed his eyes and felt Grace's presence, not as ghost or memory, but as living legacy in every life this place touched. She'd died fighting for something worth preserving, and he'd spent every day since proving that her fight had not been in vain. "Rest well, Gracie," he whispered to the darkness. "We did it. Your dream is real. Your children are safe. Your legacy lives." And in the silence that followed, he could almost hear her voice carried on the mountain wind. "I know, my love. I always knew you could." Connor smiled and let sleep take him. Scouts breathing a steady rhythm, the ranch settling into peaceful night, the legacy continuing, unbroken and beautiful, exactly as Grace had envisioned all along. The homestead had become what it was always meant to be. Not just land, not just buildings, but freedom, hope, home, and loyalty, the fierce, unbreakable kind that saves lives, lived on in every heart that found healing here, forever.